Chapter 7, Bagman and Crouch. Chapter text to guest review Sirius. I really don't have a lot of explanation for JK's slip. Considering Remus gets his own subplot later in Book 6, it really confuses me why she virtually left him out of 4, and for the majority of 5 except that one scene. I, like most of the fandom, kept expecting Remus to pop back up any chapter in cadence with Sirius, helping him on the run, or mentioning he was out looking for the traitor. Or anything. It's depressing since he's one of my favorite characters, and it's going to keep being depressing to the Marauders. It's true that Harry connected to Sirius and began to look at him in a father way. She could hardly write Sirius out after that, but instead found an even more vile way than ignoring him. But what I always wanted to see was for Harry to look at Remus as what an uncle could really be like. All he gets is Vernon, and yet it would have fascinated me to see Remus trying to play that role right along and kick Vernon's overly large, but at it. As for Ron and Hermione forgetting about him as well, they didn't really have any connection to him outside of he was the best teacher ever, so I let it slide for them a lot more. As James started, he prayed to Merlin and anything else that this was the Quidditch chapter already. He'd waited long enough for it. Remus already had a grin flickering on him. He loved hearing about wizards' poor attempts to dress like muggles. Remus and Lily collectively snorted with amusement at that mental image, while James and Sirius exchanged curious looks, but decided they didn't really want to know what a galash was. It sounded like some noise one of Hagrid's pets would make. Lily lost it, and had to press her hand firmly to her mouth to suppress her giggles. Harry and Remus weren't much better, and this time Sirius did ask, which one of those is wrong? He may know a fair bit about Muggle technology and some of their other things through his Muggle studies class, but they hadn't gone into great detail about dressing. Mostly, they just wore blue jean material, but he wasn't certain why. Both, Harry managed to choke out, only having managed to restrain himself back then because he and Hermione had been the only ones to get the joke, and they hadn't wanted to make the wizards feel bad. Does Arthur just know everybody? Remus asked, only half intelligible since he was still laughing. I've yet to see him meet anyone he doesn't know the name of. I consider this a good thing, James shrugged back. Harry strangely felt a wash of sympathy at the mention of that name, which was puzzling since he had no real feelings towards the actual man. Still put off by the last time he dug into a name, he didn't press at it. Harry's feeling of concern only increased, but it only managed to confuse him all the more. Why would he be worried for a muggle? Why would he be getting worried at all? Oh, I guess he owns the campsite then, Sirius said in surprise. That poor thing, Lily sighed. Why? James asked at once, feeling that was a bit harsh. Wizards weren't that bad around muggles. I can only imagine how confused he must be. Wizards aren't very subtle at hiding themselves. She smirked at her husband, who clearly wanted to argue back, but at a loss as to how. He was aware he was pretty bad, and he knew plenty of people, like his wife, who tried to correct him on it all the time. Where did he get a 5 from? Remus asked. There's a 20 on the note, and he got the 10 right. I guess the pound symbol looks like a 5 to him, Lily offered with a shrug, not really sure how he could make the mistake herself, as she found Muggle money far easier to understand than the wizard money that had taken her quite some time to work out. I'm not surprised that's his first guess, Lily nodded. James couldn't help a little smile, though. At least he wasn't the only one who tried to do that first in hopes it would work. Yes, well, there's a very big event going on this weekend, Sirius said with a completely straight face. That's cause for a little oddity. James agreed. Lily, Remus, and Harry began snickering all over again, but this time James just ignored them. Remus sighed in pity, thinking it was an accidental apparition, and one more thing poor Mr. Roberts would try to analyze. The man's brain would turn to mush by the day's end if this kept up. Or he could do that, Lily yelped in mild surprise. He was pretty fast on the draw, Sirius nodded in agreement, which gave them all a bit of a dark laugh, for the first time wondering if Lockhart had ever recovered from that mishap, but none of them able to care too much. Oh dear, Lily squeaked in real fear this time. That cannot be good for him. You'd really think they'd have someone with some muggle knowledge at least around where Mr. Roberts is working. Try to keep these people under control at least in front of him, so that wouldn't be necessary, Remus agreed with a pitiful frown. Would that give him, like permanent brain damage or something? Harry frowned in sympathy for the poor muggle, deciding those memory charms on him was probably where his memory gap on this man stemmed from. I don't think so. Sirius' tone showed he really didn't even mean that, but I can't say it's a tested theory either. I'm sure he's fine. James couldn't stop a little frown of his own, but he tried to keep up the confidence. They won't do anything permanent to him. No one could think of anything else to say, though, so he decided to keep going and hope this man explaining things would say just that. Ludo Bagman's running around there. Sirius practically screamed, leaning over like he wanted to snatch the book away from James, who held it tightly to his chest now and glared at his hand like he'd bite if he came closer. Sirius turned his attention on Harry instead, begging, "Please tell me you meet him. I'll take even a passing glance." Harry's shoulders were shaking with suppressed laughter, but what flowed out of his mouth was a pure gut reaction he didn't have too much problems deciphering. "I've got a good feeling at least, yes." Sirius looked likely to faint from happiness. His little pup was meeting a Quidditch star, so Harry neglected telling him another sinking feeling he was getting about Bagman. He decided he didn't really like the man. Something about him bothered Harry, but as always he had no clear idea what. "I feel so bad for the people who have to work during this," Remus sighed. "You're right," James nodded along. "This should be a national holiday." Lily and Remus snorted at how much he clearly meant that, while James gave an agreeable smirk at Sirius when he agreed before he kept going. "I wonder what year he retired." Sirius couldn't seem to stop himself from blurting out, though James in no way looked upset as he grinned at Sirius getting wound up about this. "What do you think his stats were like by then? Better, and he ended on a high, or slowly going down so he retired early?" "Who do you, Sirius?" Lily cut in, knowing he could go on like this for hours. "Please, you lot can talk about this over dinner, and I won't say a word, but let him get through this first." Sirius stuck his tongue out at her and crossed his arms in a pouting gesture, but bit his tongue as James kept going. Wonder if the Malfoys showed up, Remus thought in surprise, knowing that was their preferred animal, and they'd do nothing less than the best even in tent form. He really hoped Harry didn't run across them, though, really hoping for just a nice calm Quidditch-filled weekend. Lily had been giggling almost non-stop for all of those descriptions, remembering her plans of taking the family camping and just imagining James and Sirius trying to set all of that up as well. Oh, they were going to have so much fun. "That's always true of communities," Sirius muttered, thinking it wasn't always a good thing either. James couldn't help a little snort of surprise, then spelled out how Weasley had been misspelled, causing the others the same reaction. "How did they screw that up?" Harry demanded with an eye roll. Mr. Weasley would have given them his name to mark the spot. "Maybe he has bad handwriting," Sirius shrugged. "Or it was someone's idea of a joke," Remus offered, thinking of the time he'd convinced most of Gryffindor House to call Sirius and James Brown and Partam for the day. "Oh, this should be fun," Lily smirked, already thinking of poor Arthur trying to work all of this out, though at least he'd probably get a kick out of it. "At least he's enjoying himself," Remus agreed with Lily, thinking of an over-enthusiastic James and Sirius acting much the same way. "He only brought two?" Harry asked in surprise, thinking that would hardly be enough space after doing a head count. James just gave him a knowing smile, though. He had a very good idea that Arthur wasn't doing this all muggle, but kept going to see if he was right. Something Harry did again now, as he visibly remembered what he'd walked into, causing the four of them to give affectionate laughs, knowing they'd never get tired of watching him react to magic. "That's probably just coincidence," Remus shrugged. "The engorgement charm placed on them would have reacted to the person who'd placed it. Though it might adapt to the person setting it up," he added on thoughtfully, never having considered the idea, but magic was known to change form. "I think it's the second," Lily nodded in agreement. "It wouldn't be the first time I've heard magic acting like that. Wasn't that the guy Mr. Weasley works with in his office?" Sirius puzzled. "Guess that means he's not coming to the game." "Well, of course he isn't," Harry sighed, now feeling slightly foolish for his surprise. Of course Mr. Weasley would think ahead like that, though since Hermione had been thinking the same thing at the time, at least he wasn't the only one. "Even more fun," Sirius perked up. "I hope you get to roast some marshmallows." Harry nodded to himself as these thoughts trickled back to him, wondering why he had a feeling his knowledge of the world of magic was fixing to expand quite a lot this year. Something about Hogwarts, Or maybe it was another wizarding school. Did those even exist? Of course they did, he corrected himself. Hogwarts couldn't be the only one. Sirius gave the baby in his lap an affectionate little cuddle, while Lily and James exchanged indulgent smiles, treasuring every moment they had with their toddler, and already trying to picture him when he got to that age. Tell Daddy to stop leaving it around, Lily smirked, already picturing herself instead of that mother, Harry instead of little Kevin, James being thoroughly confused, then abundantly pleased, when he found out his son was engorging slugs with his wand. Causing all five of them to laugh merrily, that was a picture-perfect moment. Sirius' eyes sparked with interest. He had already pre-ordered one of those for Harry for his first birthday, and couldn't wait to see his little pup gliding around this living room carpet on it. They are on vacation, James shrugged. And I don't see why Mr. Roberts would come wandering into the campsite, give them a bit of a break. Then, I hope, they all get a real surprise, Remus laughed. Wow, they're even talking about me in Africa, Sirius smirked, happy he was on the opposite side of Harry, so none of his friends could take a swing at him. Harry blinked in surprise at the color, the question bursting out of him before he even had time to process. Do other countries have to say the same spells in the same language as Hogwarts? Is that why the fires are different color, because they translate them, or are they universal? Lily's eyes brightened, as they always did, whenever she had the opportunity to look into new things, starting out by voicing, "Well, I know, for a fact that saying the spell is just a way to channel magic, but the incantations themselves aren't set in stone. After all, accidental magic doesn't require a command word. It's simply your mind using your magic in an uncontrolled way. The wand and spells are designed to help you direct your powers, which makes your magic more focused and powerful." She only paused for a moment, thinking through her answer to make sure of it, before concluding. So I would have to say no. Other countries most likely do have a different system for their spell casting. Most of ours are in Latin, with some exceptions. But I presume these African folk, for example, have a different spell to create fire than our incendio, creating the different color through their own phrasing of it. Harry was watching her with wide-eyed fascination. Even James and Sirius looked pretty intrigued, as they'd never thought too deeply about this. But when Remus made to jump in, that old light in his eyes saying he may even be creating a debate's worth of commentary on the subject, James quickly jumped in saying, "All right, more fun things to discuss later. Sirius and I can go crazy badgering Harry about Quidditch stats he will hopefully remember, and you two can have a gay old time discussing that." This time Remus stuck his tongue out at his two friends, but didn't protest. "What's that?" Harry asked quickly, for the first time trying to get information about other wizard schools other than his own. "The American Hogwarts. Salem is in the United States, yes." He vaguely recalled, either from his history of magic or perhaps his primary school, he'd never paid attention to either honestly, some terrible movement against witches involving a place called Salem. "Yes, there's a Salem in the United States, but no, their school is called Ilvermorny," Remus shrugged. "I think this is some kind of women's organization." Sirius began laughing anew, having known a few Irish supporters in his time at Hogwarts, and they were well known for going all out like this. "Yes, yes, I do," James nodded happily, knowing he wouldn't be much better if his preferred team had made the cup. "I just cannot imagine why." Lily rolled her eyes indulgently. "Here's hoping Harry has more sense than those two," Remus muttered quietly to Lily, who nodded while she watched James and Sirius smirk. They knew full well they'd love to start a Quidditch fight by supporting the opposite team in the middle of that field, possibly start a riot. It would be plenty of fun. "Such a missed opportunity," Sirius sighed, shaking his head tragically, still unable to keep that smile off his face. "With any luck, vultures will be circling everywhere," James snickered. "Oh, new blood," Remus nodded. "He must be good to be the star player on everyone's tent," Lily shrugged. "Wasn't Charlie talking about him earlier?" Sirius mused. "Hadn't he said he was such an excellent seeker, it would be a tough game just between him and the whole other team? This match is going to be wicked." James looked like that smile was going to be frozen in place very soon, hoping it would come up any time now. Harry gave a funny laugh, though he wasn't sure why. Something about Hermione and Crumb, though. Why would he have a feeling about that? Wow, and their star player. James was practically bouncing in his seat by this point. He's got a nice long career ahead of him. Or early retirement, assuming a bludger doesn't knock him stupid, Lily muttered. Lily, Harry, and Remus cracked all over again. Even James and Sirius joined in this time, as they were certain that even in the Muggle world, blokes weren't exactly supposed to be wearing gowns. Well, he's not wrong, Lily managed to get out breathily, causing the boys to continue melting into the cushions with laughter, tears nearly coming to their own eyes. They'd been laughing so much lately. Why couldn't they have just started with this book? It was certainly the most enjoyable yet. Waving aside that pesky first chapter which they had all adamantly put behind them, they were all finally starting to hope this good feeling would last a whole year. "Oh, there's going to be a new Quidditch captain this year," James yelped in remembered excitement, now realizing that Harry wasn't it, and wishing he'd gotten more of an insight into the rest of his team to see who it was. He was upset for his son it wasn't him, but he supposed as a fourth year it would be too soon for him anyways. Surely someone else would graduate, and his son would get the chance before he left school, though. Congratulations to him, Sirius nodded, really meaning it. They'd all had some irksome moments when it came to Wood's captaining, but the boy was a good player, and he did deserve that at least. Hopefully working with professionals would help him with his, team problems. Both James and Sirius gave Harry not-so-subtle little nudges, which he still dutifully ignored despite the blush trying to prove otherwise. For some reason, whenever he thought of Cho, he didn't get a real feeling for her. Sure, she was still pretty even in his memory, and while he was certain he may have liked her at the time, she held no interest to him for any length of time, causing all of them to smile at him now, and Harry to burrow even deeper into his seat, trying his best to avoid all eyes and brush his bangs onto his forehead with nerves. The exact opposite reaction of what James would have done, giving Sirius and Remus an extra shot of delight. "Wasn't that one called Castelabruxo?" Sirius asked, finally stopping his smirking at Harry. "Sounds right," James shrugged, wincing in sympathy for Bill. "Not stupid," Lily corrected at once. "It only just now occurred to you of the wider world. All kids come to that moment at some point." Harry gave her a bright smile back, never growing tired of anyone in the room trying to correct his negative side, always feeling a happy bubble the more he realized he'd never had the experience before, though it only increased the craving every time that he had grown up not knowing all of them. "Would not surprise me," Remus agreed. "Well, you were taking your time," Sirius chuckled, giving Lily and Remus another friendly giggle, picturing that all too easily. "Well, I'm glad for it." Lily's eyes continued to brighten with interest, knowing she'd much rather enjoy the thoroughfare of the ministry rather than Quidditch. "There's a point of conversation," Sirius smirked. Harry felt a terrible tightening in his gut at the mention of that place, unconsciously moving closer to Sirius, causing his godfather to give him a look of surprise, though neither of them said anything, knowing if they did Harry would be the one to pay for it. Still, the motion bothered Sirius, and he was finally distracted from the upcoming game to let his mind wander back and wonder what he was up to. Had he gotten Harry's letter yet? And why would that place have any connection to him? "Thank you, Captain Obvious," James snorted. "Here I thought you'd frog-marched." "How did they know where we were?" Harry asked in surprise. "Remember that little post from where your portkey landed?" Remus reminded him. "They would have gotten the same instructions as you from there." Which gave Sirius an instant distraction, Harry's odd moment completely lost in his mind. "The Ludo Bagman. So you do meet him," he practically screeched in Harry's ear, causing him to quickly reverse course and edge away from him, rubbing at his ear but grinning all the same. "Guess I was right that time," he agreed easily, though still unable to shake that feeling that he didn't enjoy the man's company long. "Now that's saying something," Lily smirked. "Thinking someone's being a wee bit nostalgic," Remus snickered. Sirius was practically quivering with excitement, wondering when that had come up. Had it cost them the game? Had he persevered through it and bludgeoned someone off in retaliation? "As he should be," James nodded along, his tone conveying the exact same feelings. "Timing," Remus exclaimed, not even bothering to fight down his laughter much anymore. "Guess those Africans got out of hand," Lily chuckled. "Let's see him say that to his face," Sirius sniffed, never liking two-faced people. "Even the parents get them backwards," James smirked, still nursing and quite liking the idea if he could somehow have twins in his future. "Least he was subtle about it," Lily sniffed, still sore as the rest of them from Mr. Diggory's presence. "He's an international Quidditch player," Sirius offered. I'm guessing he's used to fame, and he's being polite enough not to shove on Harry about it. Harry's instincts rose even more, his eyes narrowing as he was now sure this had something to do with his own disapproval of Bagman, something about him. And maybe Ron, it was definitely one of the Weasleys. At least he thought so. Molly's not there, James scoffed. It's their money, let them be. Lily narrowed her eyes at her husband. She didn't much approve of gambling and quite agreed with Arthur, and most likely with Marley, that those kids shouldn't be until they were at least of age, but didn't pick an argument for it now. Harry's gut went haywire. There it was the twins and Bagman that made him feel so uneasy. But then Remus gave a breathy whistle as he said, well, they're certainly playing to win. And the feeling was gone at once, to be replaced by a sharp pain for his trying to understand the connection. He just crossed his arms in disappointment and agreed aloud that he hoped it paid off. At once, Harry again felt a pull, something in him saying that he should have a memory about this bet, but considering he'd just dealt with a mental backlash, he wasn't going to push it. I'm loving him more and more, Sirius cheered, his own eyes shining with childlike glee. Any man who can laugh at that has a great sense of humor. Oh, I really hope those twins win now. Can you imagine them getting in good terms with Bagman? They might even get a sponsorship, and breathe Sirius, Remus said peaceably, at least trying to rein his friend in. Let's see if they win the match first. Though privately he was thinking it could work out the way Sirius was picturing, even if they didn't win their bet. If Bagman did like their ideas enough, there was some great potential room in there. I still don't care, James happily chirped, like his friends all too pleased at where that could head. Bagman really should consider that their father is telling them no, Lily sighed, and back him up. It's rude otherwise. They're, what, about a year from turning 17? Sirius sharp back. When's their birthday, Harry? He directed, looking to make his point. April 1st, Harry shrugged. The boys blinked in surprise before all four of them cracked up laughing at how perfect these twins had been born on April Fool's Day. Sirius quickly collected himself, though, continuing like Harry had just made his point for him. Less than a year, then. Their father really shouldn't get too much of a say what they do with their money. Lily sighed, still in disagreement that Bagman wasn't showing proper manners, but before she could say anything else, Harry asked, You guys got any predictions for the game? Sadly not, James pouted, as we don't know their stats or anything, otherwise I would put some money down. Oh, I definitely want to meet this guy in person. James wriggled around in pleasure, more than pleased to meet someone who was giving such vivid support to the twins. Harry blinked in surprise, trying to process how you could cram so many languages into your head, but looking around he saw this wasn't new information to the others, which meant Crouch must have made this public knowledge often. He'd probably been at it for years then. Giving the boys yet another happy round of chuckling, fully agreeing with Fred on that point. Was he really expecting them to be impressed or something? Lily snorted. I'm positive Percy's mentioned this a dozen times to them. Does he keep expecting a different response? He's fighting a losing battle if so, James agreed. Then James gave a deep sigh, wondering why he couldn't go one chapter without that being brought up of late. He just wanted to enjoy the cup, not keep thinking of that poor dead girl and the return of Voldemort. Was that too much to ask for? Making all five of them wince in sympathy, sadly knowing that not to be true. I can already see why Percy's in love with him, Sirius snorted. I at least give the others credit for trying. Lily gave yet another smirk as she flashed back to all of those flashy outfits she'd heard about. Not all the wizards have the means to look into that kind of thing beforehand. I'm sure he probably had someone lay the outfit out for him and probably didn't even look into it himself. You are not encouraging him to us, Remus sniffed in disdain. All of them couldn't help another snort of amusement, picturing that conversation taking place, a nice laugh. Ouch! Lily winced in sympathy, while the boys only laughed harder. She felt bad for him. Clearly all of his hard work at the office wasn't paying him too much good yet, if Crouch didn't even know Percy's name yet. He's not going to correct him? James asked in surprise. I'm sure Crouch could call him Grindelwald, and Percy wouldn't correct him, Sirius snorted, not really noticing Harry give an odd start at the name. That almost feels like a slap in the face to Percy. Remus still had a bemused smile in place, even if he was starting to feel a little bad for it. He's literally talking to Percy's dad and didn't acknowledge the name mess-up. I've got a feeling Crouch would sooner eat his highly polished shoe than correct himself, Lily huffed. Well, he's got a point there, Lily nodded, her mind spinning curiously. I suppose if they were charmed to simply look like a cloud or something, muggles wouldn't even pay too much attention to them. I really can see how they could work. I still don't see those replacing brooms, James shrugged. Plus, it's the same problems with the flying car. You can enchant it all day, but the charms will wear off, and eventually some muggle will notice. It'll cause more harm than good, I'm sure. A spark of interest was still there in Lily's eyes. She looked fully prepared to actually start a debate with her husband about it, but Sirius groaned and pleaded, "Can we do this later? I want to hear about the cup, and this book's been dragging on it long enough already." Lily huffed as she muttered, "You never let me have any fun," but didn't argue as James happily kept going. Harry felt a funny feeling about that, like he should laugh at Crouch and something to do with the law. Does he do something illegal? Harry couldn't process it very well. He was too busy watching Sirius pantomiming like he was trying to remove a stick from his arse. "Now what's this?" Remus asked in surprise. "Something else that the head of sports is also involved in. Clearly not just some dull meeting then." James nodded in curious agreement. "What?" All five of them yelped in surprise this time. "Now what on earth?" Lily began faintly, shooting furtive looks at Harry, a sad but familiar feeling of fear starting to creep into her already. She was being paranoid, of course. Just because something was going down at the school this year didn't automatically place her son in danger. But she really couldn't beat the feeling away anymore. It had too much practice settling a coldness in her chest. Harry was blinking spastically, just knowing something was there. This was a part of the echoing feeling he'd held when this was mentioned earlier, but it wasn't complete yet. Nor was it boding well that his first instinct was to not be pleased about it. Still, none of them had a clue what this could be, so James kept going for now in hopes Bagman would say more. That wasn't as distracting and funny the second time, only Sirius managing a faint laugh at Percy's expense, while the others were still wrapped up in curiosity. James actually almost passed out, that distracted him. "Why, you're in the T-top." He was clearly unable of stuttering that out, his eyes likely to fall onto his glasses any second, they were getting so wide with excitement. "You've literally got the best seat in the house," Sirius half screeched, "and they were just given to you." "I'd pay my weight in gold for that kind of seat." Harry had a wide smile indeed on his face, childishly pleased at the experience he was fixing to get. The only thing that would make it better was having the four of them hear about it with him, so that he could picture all the more easily what it would have been like had they really been up there with him. James was left a gasping mess before he slapped his brain back into action, already half yelling his excitement as he continued. "Now that's just cruel," Lily sighed, though clearly none of the boys noticed. She seemed the only one left to ponder on the Hogwarts part. The males were all jittering in place for the match to come. "That joke's not going away any time soon," Remus muttered to himself, more excited than he would care to admit to listen to this coming game. Lily sighed, already rubbing at her ear in discontent, but still unable to tell off James for being so blatantly excited for what he was reading. He needed this release. Peter's betrayal would most likely return eventually and continue to eat away at him, so she knew she'd let him carry on like this as long as he could. "I'd buy one of those just so I could take it back to Hogwarts," Sirius smirked. "It's a two-for deal." "Good to see Ron supporting his team," Remus snickered, now more unclear than ever which side he was rooting for. "Ooh, another good buy," James all but squeed. "Can be more than useful outside of just watching Quidditch games at Hogwarts too. We use them all the time to spy on the other houses, and the teachers, and—" "Okay," Lily did cut in this time. "I sleep better having less knowledge of what you lot did in your free time in and outside of that castle." "You know you love our stories," Sirius shot back at once, and his smirk only grew when Lily didn't deny it. Still, James was too pent up for the cup to let them keep at it. "Ah, they get over it," James said from experience, watching Remus pretend to ignore his friends eyeing him. "You just got to keep at it and wave away the thanks. They repay you back in other ways," causing Sirius to release a bark like laughter as he joked. "That's all you spend on his presents, a galleon. For shame, Harry, I think you actually owe him a few more now." Harry pretended to look offended for a few moments, but he couldn't hold the expression long as he started laughing. "Oh yes, I'm so sure that was on their to-do list," Remus nodded, feigning a straight face. "She really saved them some gold by taking that task on," James agreed with a solemn nod before the chuckling continued. "Worth it," Harry smirked. "I'm sure they won't regret that if it pays off," Sirius snickered. James' mouth sagged in shock when he realized that his chapter was over. Then he turned the wide-set eyes to Sirius, before his face turned just as quickly away and he handed over the book. A lot of this chapter turned out to be Remus and Lily ganging up on James and Sirius, and I'm not sorry for that. It was pretty fun, and the reason I sat those two beside each other. I googled what British money looks like. Sorry, my American is showing. And from what I could tell, British have the numbers on their money as well, so that was my best guess at Arthur's confusion. If I'm wrong and there's something else going on, please correct me. Childishly happy shout out to the American and all other wizarding schools being revealed after all these years. I got sorted into Horned Serpent. Let me know yours. Chapter 8, The Quidditch World Cup. Chapter text in response to Diamond Goddess, who actually posted this question back in Chapter 2 of Poa, but I wanted to address it here in the hopes the guest reader comes to this part and finds it. Who asked, "Is Regulus still alive in this fic? Since he died at 16 in the books, I'm assuming he is dead by now in this timeline." Response, did he die at 16 in the books? I thought he didn't until at least after school. Either way, if he is dead, then Sirius doesn't know because he doesn't keep track of him or anyone else in his family. To Zyrausen, thanks, I always love to hear what your favorite, funniest part of the chapter is. Here's the hyped-up Quidditch World Cup. Sirius cradled the book in his hands for a moment, a curiously contemplative look on his face, pretending he couldn't hear James mumbling under his breath. He got to read about Harry's championship game last year, can't believe he gets all the good ones. Sirius, unbelievably, didn't even hesitate as he gave the book a toss back and said, "Knock yourself out, Prongs." James caught it with fumbling fingers and was still blinking in shock at his best friend, causing Sirius to smirk all the wider as he shrugged and said, "What? I'm not going to argue the point. You're right. I got a whole Quidditch game where Harry won. You should get the lesser of them with just some stupid World Cup." James couldn't resist sticking his tongue out at him for the picking. He knew reverse psychology when he heard it, but it wasn't going to work. Sirius had given this up, and he wasn't getting it back. Lily more than agreed. She wasn't even fond of the sport, and she held an ever-growing smile on her face, all the boys in the room acting like they were on a sugar high. They were so excited to be hearing about this. It had certainly been built up enough. And gets sold out every year, Remus added on, all of them also grinning at the look now back on Harry's face. Top box! Sirius all but screamed in remembered excitement. Remus once again couldn't help but think, did everyone in the world know Arthur? But he was too busy laughing that James was half yelling as he read with overflowing enjoyment, so he didn't bother. Harry's eyes kept getting wider the more he remembered that place, thinking it nearly put the Hogwarts Quidditch field to shame with its massiveness, something he never would have believed possible before this moment. James and Sirius, having only attended one themselves previously, were flashing grins at each other in remember exuberance of how that match had gone, having always wanted to take their kids one day, and getting to hear this play out through Harry, now the closest they'd yet got to that dream. So this was practically wish fulfillment to them. Remus and Lily had never gone to one, and the immense size and splendor of this spectacle was actually starting to blow their mind. Harry did a double take at that, his mind caught off guard by the sudden unexpected visit he thought he was getting from Darby. "What?" the others squawked in surprise. Harry was frowning in puzzled confusion, placing his hand to his temple in agitation as the moment left him, and he was left floundering to explain. I'm not sure. Just looking around, thought I spotted him." He was still grimacing, so James decided to keep reading to clarify an answer. The fact that Harry thought this twice didn't necessarily mean he was right. He would have thought the same thing twice in a row, with his memories being replenished in the style they were. It would definitely be something that needed to be explained if it was Darby, since they hadn't heard of the little guy for over a year now in Harry's time. "Not Darby, then," Sirius stated. "Thank you, Captain Obvious," Remus snorted. "You're welcome, Lieutenant Cannies," Sirius shot back. "Had been," Lily giggled. You mean is or was in that instance? Harry rolled his eyes. He wasn't the one who'd written this down. I never realized that before, James muttered randomly, completely unconcerned now that it wasn't Darby and wanting to get back to the cup. Did you tell him about Darby? Remus asked in surprise. Not directly, Harry shrugged, but maybe Ron did, or the voice just got him curious. It did stick out. Lily started humming. It's a small world after all, under her breath in surprise. But since this was one of the least strangest or coincidental things that had happened to Harry, she didn't mention it. Brilliant deduction skills on this one, Sirius grumbled under his breath, not having appreciated one bit the last elf Harry had to deal with, hoping this one wouldn't have anything at all to do with his pup. Has she ever met the Malfoys? Remus demanded in disgust. I think she should hold that to herself until otherwise. By the stunned look of the others, it didn't take much for Harry to ascertain, so that's weird then. Absolutely, James nodded, his mind actually derailed, partially enough his tone wasn't as high-pitched as Winky's from excitement at least. Never heard of a thing like that. I think it's cute, Lily shrugged, a small frown still on her face at the thought of that elf. I'd take him up on that offer in a heartbeat. Let's hope you're not the only one, Remus shrugged. Harry glanced at Sirius, who he'd noticed had stayed absent, and couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. Sirius had made it perfectly clear he certainly wasn't fond of elves. What would he think of this? He said nothing, though, and Harry was certain if he really cared he would have, so Harry didn't bring it up. That would be a first, I'm sure, Remus muttered. Sirius watched Harry and Lily start to look rather confused and upset by this, so he groused. This one's starting to depress me as much as the last one. Can't you just let it go? With an eye roll. Personally, he didn't hate Darby as much as he initially had, not after he'd at least tried to save Harry, been abused by the Malfoys for years, and Harry now considered him a friend. He still wasn't sure what Harry and Lily's big fuss about them were, though. This little Winky was acting the way any other elf would. Ooh, that's terrible, Lily half cooed, half looked like she was going to start scolding any second. That wizard couldn't have sent up anyone else, their friend or anything, instead of the elf he knows is afraid of heights. He might not know, James offered. Not too many wizards bother to get to know the likes and dislikes of their elves. And I doubt she'd inform him, Sirius nodded in agreement. It's odd enough to bring your elf to this type of thing, Remus shrugged, looking to break up Lily's agitated face, that James hardly sounded more concerned about this than Sirius. So I'm sure there was some reason. Hope the Malfoys didn't get another one, he privately added in his head, thinking that wouldn't go down well with anyone. He then looked to James to keep going, which he happily did, thinking they were getting way too worked up over an elf. Harry felt like a tap dancer was running up his spine all of a sudden. There was something right there. His body gave a great shudder of protest at his prolonging on trying to think on this for even a second, and he let loose a great gasp of surprise before he sagged back into the couch and glared balefully around the room in agitation, muttering the usual, sorry memories, nothing. The others did not look happy. In fact, they were getting pretty concerned at how often Harry was doing that even before he went to school this time. But what could they do? Sirius suddenly gasped and looked likely to fall off the couch, causing the others to jump in concern as he turned a stunned look to Harry and demanded, I've just realized, you haven't been to the kitchens yet. No, Harry said uneasily, still rather concerned by his overreaction. As were the others, apparently, as James swatted at him and snapped, You almost gave me a heart attack. Of course he hasn't, you dolt. We would have heard about that. But he's entering his 4th year, Sirius added on, looking from James to Remus and back like they were missing the biggest of pictures. We could have walked down there blindfolded by then. I'm going to strangle you, Lily told him pleasantly. And Merlin help me, I never thought I'd say this. But James, get back to your game before I do. Sirius was still eyeing Harry like he was truly concerned for his well-being at this slip, but James was happy to oblige. Shattering all the annoyed looks at Sirius for them to begin, snickering at Ron, Sirius gave a slight pout. That's what he'd been trying to do. Clearly they were being overly sensitive. Though upon reflection, after the past few days they'd had, he supposed it had been just a tad uncalled for. The Irish always bring leprechauns, Remus quickly told Harry before he could ask. Bit of a bore, really, Sirius nodded. You think they'd try to break their stereotype? I do wonder what the Bulgarians will bring, Lily admitted. I really don't think Ron can call his dad's job boring anymore, James muttered, finding Arthur's presence more and more charming as this continued. Causing all five of them to start snickering, that wasn't too hard to picture, especially as they could see the twins doing this to him on purpose. Why's he bowing at them anyways? Lily giggled. They're not the monarchy. Asterisk, trying to show off. Remus offered with a shrug. You become the stupid boy who lived, Harry grumbled. Then he'll butter up to you just fine. James could not get that out without a hard bite to his words, it sounding all the more harsh since his recent spike of this same feeling towards his own best friend. He didn't need some stranger acting that part as well. I never understood that, Remus snorted. Talking loudly does not make them understand you any better. Don't ask us, Lily shrugged. Harry was the only one who let out a surprised bit of laughter at that, with a rather hard edge, finding it funny his scar did a better job than the minister. He did ponder on why he was being so harsh towards the man who hadn't really done anything to him. Is he the only linguistic in the whole ministry? Sirius snorted. I would have thought at least the minister would bother to learn some for this upcoming game. Remus nodded in agreement, as he would have known he'd be meeting at least a few foreign dignitaries. That's Crouch's elf, Lily grumbled, this not making her feel any better. Guess I'm not surprised, Remus shrugged. His is as old a house as any. James spat out that last word in shock, which quickly turned into a haughty glare. Of course those Malfoys would have to get the top box as well. Harry couldn't go 5 minutes without having to deal with their pompous arse. He would probably turn all sorts of jealous when he found out the Weasleys were up there with them, and they'd gotten in for free because Arthur had done a good deed. Teach them a lesson. There was a bit of grumbling all around from the others, but as all they could do was protest, James slogged on. He wanted to get to the game already, and hopefully ignore the existence of those particular purebloods. Harry felt a flash of something he didn't quite understand as he first remembered this woman, was that warmth. Not quite as much as he'd felt about learning of Mrs. Weasley, but there was definitely something there. It was gone the moment he caught sight of his godfather. Sirius' face gave a particularly ugly sneer at the mention of one of his relatives, having never liked Narcissa any more than her sister Bellatrix. Both had their noses so high in the air it was a wonder they didn't drown in the rain. I'm sure it's the present she's forced to live with herself, Sirius muttered. Like he knows the bottom of his shoe, Remus grumbled. Then he remembered the last time those two had met, and he cracked up laughing at the expense of Malfoy Sr. again. He quickly filled in the others, at least giving James back a smile as he continued. Which Arthur won, with brilliant irony, Sirius cackled. Harry ground his teeth together hard in frustration, knowing he couldn't have said anything at the time, but always the most agitated when people made digs at the Weasleys like that. Pity that, Lily snapped, as he was showing his real face right then. Remus mimed retching off the side of the couch in revulsion, something they all heartily agreed with. At least it was a good cause, if for the wrong reasons. Sad he can't mean it, James sighed. That a girl, Lily nodded with a proud smile. Pure of a conscience, Sirius muttered. She won't be so second-class when she knocks your son's lights out again, Remus happily smirked. James was just thanking his lucky stars this chapter hadn't tried to end right here. All this build-up, and he would have had to try and convince Harry to give up the chapter next. James was pretty close to sounding like he had the same charm placed on him, making the baby wriggle uncomfortably in Sirius' lap. But then he cooed gently to his godson, which seemed to convince the baby it was all in good fun as he relaxed back into his arms. "Yoo-ho," Remus said in a happy little sing-song voice. That wasn't their brightest idea, Sirius snickered. But a plentiful distraction, James cackled with glee. What a vila. Harry inserted, a puzzled frown on his face, that old agitation never waning where the answer should have been. Lily chose to explain. They're human-like girls, with a very beautiful exterior used to draw in men, sort of like land sirens. They're not quite so much to look at when they get angry, though, she finished with an odd smile. Harry was still very curious indeed, wondering at that human-like part. Were they like Remus, human, but with a touch of something else, or like centaurs, a touch of human, but mostly something else? He decided to wait it out and see for himself, causing all four of them to crack up laughing at Harry's expense, who was now doing his best to detail every inch of the carpet, still unable to hide his bright red face. Ah, magic, Sirius said, with a dreamy look in place. He'll do that every time these are mentioned, James snorted. Apparently he met one once when he got dragged on holiday, and it was the best night of his life. You're just jealous. Sirius' grey eyes were gleaming as he flashed his teeth in a wide grin at both of his friends. Actually, we just don't believe you, Remus shot back. Sirius looked very much like he was going to argue, but James had already heard this so much he could have quoted both parties, so he kept going loudly over the two. Lily was now uncontrollably giggling, her fist pressed hard to her mouth as she easily pictured that expression on her poor unwitting son, though he in no way resembled that now. He most certainly remembered that feeling, but was not experiencing it. Instead, he had switched his attention and was now mentally memorizing the ceiling. This out to be fun, Remus' grin broadened as he finished matching Sirius' glare and instead tried to poke some fun at Harry, who was still trying to mime a statue of complete disinterest, but mostly failing. Most impressive, James snorted, as you would break your neck in a spectacular way. He was now more than happy Harry was in a magical box that would not allow that to happen. Some of the blood rushed to his face, dulled back down slightly, as he realized at least he hadn't been the only one. Ron had clearly been affected by that as well, though this didn't lessen the laughter in the room one jot. That's one way to win over a crowd, Remus nodded in agreement. Wonder how many of the Irish fell for it, Lily asked. Or do you think they all collectively bought earplugs for this occasion? I don't be too harsh on them. James still managed to keep a happy smirk in place at his own son's expense even as he defended. Most males, and probably some females in the crowd, can't help it. Ah, magic, Sirius repeated, finally stopping his insistent glare at Remus and instead adopting the expression from earlier, only causing Remus to laugh harder. Those should come with warning labels, James snorted. Will disappear, do not pretend otherwise. That would ruin the fun, Sirius snickered. You-ho, Remus said in a sing-song voice. Looks like Ron hasn't learned that lesson yet. Hopefully his dad overhears and tells, Lily shrugged, or Hermione will tell him, or Merlin Harry will laugh it off when he realizes later. Least he's keeping his priorities in line, Sirius snorted. Thank you, Ron, Lily murmured under her breath. I thought Bagman meant the other crumb. Sirius gave a happy little wriggle all over again at that news. Remembering all over again, Harry had received his own. Merlin, his godson, could probably go out on that field right now and rival those two professionals. James was in such a good mood, he didn't even care that Harry had mentally brought up those useless slugs. James and Sirius let out surprised whistles. It was a miracle for anyone to catch a glimpse of that thing at the professional level. Finally. All four boys cheered, thinking it was high time they get this part going. Someone needs to take some commentary tips from Jordan, Lily muttered, finding that boy much more fun to listen to than prattling off names. Worth it, Harry breathed, his eyes getting wider every second as memories washed back over him, the speed and skill of these players making him almost breathless. James could not have sounded any more excited for what he was reading if he tried. The pure bliss of listening to a Quidditch game, the awe on his son's face, instead of a painful memory bothering him, it was all he'd been wanting from these books. You're still watching in slow motion, Remus reminded, none of them taking but a moment to catch up and make the connection. Harry gave a muttered sorry, but James just snorted and waved him off. He wasn't particularly rooting for either side, just getting to read this one truly good thing and watching Harry enjoy it. He and his two friends still gave a hearty cheer in delight for the score, actually hoping Harry would keep it on slow down. Sure, it left him a beat behind, but they adored the extra detail. After what Ron did with his slow capture, Sirius snorted, I think we'll let you off the hook. Lily had not thought it possible, but her husband's voice continued to rise in volume and ecstasy the longer he kept going, the thrill of the game ensuing him with as much energy as if he were out there playing himself. Causing all five of them to give another giggle, almost happy the Irish were so clearly winning, as clearly the Bulgarians doing the same would result in a death watch. Now what good is that going to do you? Remus snickered. You'll miss when they stop. Better to short time it and keep my head on, Harry shrugged. Ooh, all five of them winced in sympathy for that landing, Lily with a particularly hard wince as she couldn't help picturing that happening to her baby one of these games. Oh, that's brilliant, James chirped, his eyes lighting with understanding. He'd make a nice Slytherin, Sirius snorted, finding that a pretty sneaky way of winning. Harry felt a quiet laugh under his breath. Somewhere deep inside him, he knew Ginny didn't need anything about Quidditch explained. "I love how even that warns you it's dangerous," Lily said with an obvious look at Harry, who was trying his best to ignore that look and wipe the eager smile off his face. "Best feeling in the world," all three Quidditch players murmured with smirks. They may have already come to this conclusion, but while Lily and Remus could take a step back and gave appreciate snickers at such a clever diversion, the other three still found it too much like what Malfoy would do to be too impressed. "Wow, they really are superb," Sirius yelped. "But Crumb's clearly the better seeker," Remus countered. "I think the twins were dead on with their bet," James nodded in agreement. "It all boils down to if the Irish can pull ahead enough that Crumb's capture won't mean anything. Lynch could still pull it off," Sirius countered with a calculating look, trying to take what little knowledge he had of the player and say, "One knockout doesn't mean he's done for." Lily cleared her throat loudly when both Remus and Harry looked likely to jump in, then mutely pointed to the book with an obvious look. James mumbled a bit but agreed. "What a little gnat," Sirius managed to get out, still half jittering in place from his own pent-up excitement at hearing all of this. He was actually starting to regret giving this chapter up to James. Merlin, this was a good time. Lily's giggling still managed to intensify at that mental image. "Oh," Remus chuckled, not looking particularly upset. "Am I getting the feeling this is why they were brought along?" James snickered, for some preference from the ref. "Intentionally or not, they're getting it now," Sirius nodded. "He cannot be the only one," Lily nodded. Her husband sounded exactly the same way. "Now how come whenever I say that, I get told off for being unsportsman?" Sirius pouted, his eyes shining with too much giddy pleasure to really mean it. Causing all five of them to begin laughing all over again, this was a brilliant game in every direction. "Ooh, Harry would actually get to be at a first." James practically began shaking with a whole new level of excitement. "There's a difference between mocking and distracting," Remus snorted. "I don't see why it's worth arguing the point with him." James raised a brow in surprise. "If they tick him off enough, they'll just earn another foul." James looked incredibly pleased with himself, while his friends laughed at the old familiar expression he'd always get when he called a play right. "This is turning as bloody as your cup," Lily frowned with worry. Each new game she kept hearing about only increasing her feeling she'd rather her son not take this up professionally. "Hope they got a foul for every one of those," Sirius simply smirked. "Oh, now that can't be allowed." Lily raised a brow in surprise. "There are children present. Kids, do not mimic what that leprechaun just did." There, problem solved. James' shoulders were shaking. He was still laughing and cheering so much that his sharp back to Lily didn't hold much. Harry was spluttering in shock that those creatures of fantasy could turn into that. He most definitely understood what his mother meant now. The others didn't look particularly concerned. On the contrary, as Sirius eagerly said, "Well, Harry did get a first, it seems. As far as I know, the two team mascots have never started brawling before." "This is the best day ever," James nodded fervently. "Valuable life lesson," Sirius agreed with a wicked grin, "though thankfully I have that and brains." Lily chucked a pillow at him for that. James' reading was coming out so breathy from trying to contain all of his laughter and excitement. His reading was nearly as chaotic as the scene he was describing. "Youch!" Remus yelped in surprise, thinking that at least now he and Lynch were on even grounds, having both been clobbered in the face this game. "Was he going after the snitch?" Sirius asked curiously, his attention torn between the two so much it actually was getting hard to keep track. "It didn't say." "Not directly," Harry shook his head. "So it was a foul." "That'll do it, yeah," Lily nodded, her eyes steadily going wider in wonder at this mess of a game that all of the boys were endlessly enjoying. "Well, it seems to have just broken his nose, not his entire skull," Remus said fairly. "Thank you, Professor," Sirius snorted. They'd worked that out for themselves. Remus flushed in surprise, that old joke not holding nearly the same weight it used to, but Sirius and James were so entangled in their match they hardly seemed to notice what they were saying anymore. "Gah!" Lily yelped this time, actually fearing for that poor seeker's safety under that horde. "Because that was the important part," Lily grumbled, her mind still on poor Lynch. "That was bloody brilliant." James cheered, throwing the book in the air in celebration and bouncing in his spot like it was a trampoline. Sirius was too busy laughing, holding tight to the baby, and still likely to fall off the couch any second, though his expression was remarkably similar. The other three were only the slightest bit calmer, all laughing with pleasure at the event, though mostly laughing at the other two boys' raucous reactions to it all. James seemed to take forever to settle back down and read out the rest, not that he was trying too hard. He would never have believed 2 days ago he could ever find such a good mood again, and he was terrified the moment he kept going something would come to spoil it. He wanted to hear of nothing else for the rest of these books, and yet he knew full well that wasn't going to happen. It still didn't manage to diminish his smile one bit, so wide it nearly distorted his words as he kept going. They did it. The twins did it. They won. Remus laughed, falling back against the couch with his own shot of laughter at that realization. Oh, that's going to be so good for them. Lily nodded in absolute agreement. Now their mother would have to give them a chance. This game could not have been any better in any way, shape, or form. Sirius nodded with absolute certainty. Harry was laughing hardest of all at Bagman, shouting out those exact results. He was so happy for the twins, so happy that his family was enjoying this moment of bliss, like the others hoping this wouldn't end. Well, two of them did, James murmured happily, wiping a few watery tears of glee away. That's right, Ron. Sirius nodded along like a bobblehead. You keep applauding that idiot who recognized defeat with pride. I'm so proud you get it, James added on, tossing an easy arm around his son's shoulders and managing to keep going like that, Harry still snickering along at his side. Brave is certainly better than grumpy, Lily agreed, her shoulders shaking from her own overdone laughter. So glad that's still not being ignored, Remus managed to stutter out halfway intelligibly, causing 5 collective snorts of laughter from the room. Oh yes, clearly this minister didn't understand a lick of what Fudge had been saying, which made all previous interactions near gold. Can we have him as our minister? Sirius begged the book, turning huge puppy eyes onto anyone who would say yes. He's clearly got a sense of humor. I wish. Harry nodded in agreement. James squealed like a Quidditch fan who just found out he was meeting the winners of a Quidditch World Cup. They were going into the top box, within autograph distance of his son. I learned to laugh, man. Remus was doing it enough for both of them as he got that out. James was squirming so much it was hard to keep reading the print. He had to remove his arm from Harry to hold the book better, and even then he sounded deliriously happy. Harry winced, but for once felt no true feelings of embarrassment, as surely he was not the main focus this time. That's his keepsake, Sirius tried to whisper into Harry's ear so as not to get James to stop, but only just barely getting back to his normal tone from all the shouting, so Harry was instead left rubbing at his ear again. Who cares? The other 3 boys said at once. I can imagine, Lily nodded, her eyes still slightly more round than normal for concern of this stranger for 2 head injuries in one game. And James had said the seeker position wasn't that bad. Well, his team kind of won without him, so it's good he's not the focus, Remus snorted. Harry felt an odd clench up of his stomach, one that he managed to laugh off with the others in praise for the twins' sudden fortune. Surely that feeling was just backlash from all his happiness of the game. Nickname offered up by Shakira94. The offer and suggestions of more nicknames is always open and appreciated, until I finish book 7 in like 7 years. And I promise I'm still working on the previous ones submitted. I just don't want them to be so piled in it seems forced, you know. So I'm only putting them in when I find a good opportunity. British people bow to their monarchy, right? Sorry if they don't. I'll take it out if not. Again, sorry for the stupid American showing. Chapter 9. The Dark Mark. Chapter text, Here you go, Padfoot. James finally handed over his prize, the widest, most stupid smirk still happily planted on his face. Sirius eyed it before stretching leisurely and saying, Nah, I'm good. I think I like being skipped. It's technically Harry's turn. Have at it, pup. Harry didn't argue the point as he flipped to his chapter, ignoring that stupid little bubble that was trying to burst his good mood and inform him that nothing would be pleasant for much longer now that the cup had ended. Oh, that's nice, Lily muttered. Encourage them to lie to their mother. It's not lying, Remus said at once. Even not having heard what Lily had said, Sirius agreed with him at once. It's just keeping information from those who don't need it, a rather kind endeavor really, You should be thanking us. I'm sure that was your motto at school, she snorted at him. No, James smirked. It was I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Harry burst out laughing. Even Lily couldn't stop a little smile as she shook her head at the lot of these boys. I want to know, Sirius pouted, still happily bouncing in place in hopes they were going full throttle with that joke-shop idea. That's going to be happening the rest of the night, James snickered. What kind of arguments were these? Sirius demanded at once. Harry opened his mouth to start saying the many spiraling conversations that had been going on, but Lily quickly elbowed her way in saying, Not now, boys. How many times do I have to tell you, we're not spending hours just sitting around talking about Quidditch. I want to hear this. But Quidditch, James turned pleading eyes on his wife. And the World Cup at that, Sirius nodded fervently. Lily didn't budge though, so Harry turned back to his chapter. Well, that's not fair, Remus smiled lightly, making all of them go to bed just because one fell asleep. They might have to get up early again, Lily offered. I can only picture the bravest of souls taking up the challenge, James said solemnly. And the beautiful responses said ministry employees will receive, Sirius cackled. Lily groaned, placing her face in her hands and cursing his Quidditch father, broom-giving godfather, and whatever else felt the need to encourage her son to continue with that insane sport. Remus gave her a light pat on the shoulder in comfort, trying his hardest not to burst out laughing at the boys on the couch, who were all laughing lightly at what they felt was an overreaction from her. Well, it is rather advanced, Sirius nodded sagely. I can understand if he hadn't even shown it to you yet. With the broom and experience you've got, though. James hadn't thought it was possible for his mood to keep soaring, but speaking of this was doing so. Wouldn't be surprised if you pulled it off first try. You are literally encouraging our son to ram himself into the ground as hard as he can until he pulls that off. Lily got out, her face still buried in her fingers. Ah, it won't cause any permanent damage, Remus snickered. James seems mostly intact after his many attempts. Mostly. James demanded with a challenging brow, but still snickering lightly. Harry decided to keep going himself now. So now you actually want the attention. Remus laughed. It's for Quidditch, Sirius said like it was obvious. If Harry goes on to remember he joined the professionals, I wouldn't be surprised one little bit. That's the kind of fame I'd never be worried about him getting. You're all fired from giving him advice, Lily said stoutly. Harry was trying very hard now to force himself to relax. He'd gone to sleep after all. Surely whatever was trying to creep up and ruin his mood wasn't going to happen. Four who weren't reading felt terrible little twists inside of them, but at once tried to convince themselves they were being paranoid. They'd had an excellent run thus far. There was no way something too bad could be happening. Lily began gnawing on her lip again at once, picturing all sorts of terrible things like a fire breaking out. In that kind of crowd, it could cause a stampede and get someone hurt. Or worse, the rival team and someone had started a riot. One drunk thing had gone too far. Or her mind kept offering up one worse thing after the other, and judging by the boys' faces, she wasn't the only one. What on earth? Remus muttered, his mind spinning to try and understand what Harry's half-awake mind couldn't process yet. Harry couldn't answer, even if he wanted to. There was a hard knot of dread forming up inside of him, making it hard for him to concentrate on the words and keep going. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Lily was shaking her head so furiously to insist upon her brain she hadn't just heard the worst implication, that her hair was flying into her face, and she didn't care. It doesn't necessarily mean, Sirius tried, but even his voice failed him and he couldn't keep it going. What's going on? Harry demanded, as clearly they understood something. James tried furiously to get the words out, but he'd switched from Cloud 9 to the worst form of agitated fear so quickly, he was having trouble processing anything. They're called Death Eaters. Remus was the first to get out, new worry lines appearing around his suddenly dark eyes. They're what Voldemort calls his followers. Horrid people who do whatever their master commands, often while enjoying doing it, Sirius added on. Harry was looking between all of them, now wishing more than anything they could just go back to talking of Quidditch. He'd sadly worked this out for himself. This wasn't the first time they'd mentioned Death Eaters, but only in passing. He'd worked out for himself what they must be referring to, but now he was getting a first-hand account of their work, and he did not appreciate it. When the silence dragged on, though, Harry knew he may as well keep going to get through this chapter and this terrible event and just hope nothing like it came up again. They may even be wrong after all. Then again, how many groups of people wore masks and would be doing a thing like this? Lily gasped, her hand coming up to cover her mouth to muffle a scream at who those people must be. Muggles, or Muggle-born, being put on display, and she realized she was shaking then, but not in fear as Remus throwing her a concerned look suggested, but in rage. In her last few years at school it had been made more clear than ever that her parentage made her stand out, and while there were those who couldn't care less, there were those who only cared about that. Those second groups were most likely the current Death Eaters, in her own time and in Harry's. She'd stepped in many a time to stop terrible fights breaking out. Now she was having to listen to her son witness such a thing happening. The other boys looked just as outraged at hearing this, and Lily was almost sad to see Harry was as well, because she'd have rather seen him confused. She wanted to shield him from that terrible knowledge that people would act this way towards each other. But then she realized she was feeling all the more proud for the reaction she was seeing. If she couldn't protect him from this, at least she was warned that he knew how terrible this was, how much worse her son could have turned out if he'd been under the influence of someone like the Malfoys. Harry did not want to keep going one little bit, but as always he knew he may as well get the experience over with and just hope they turned out okay. "They've got children up there," Remus said slowly and dangerously, his hands curling into such tight fists the tendons were showing. Harry wanted more than anything just to deny that one thing, but the words failed in his throat as he turned morosely back to the book. "How is that funny?" James seethed. You don't." His temper kept tampering off his words, leaving him a spluttering mess, while his face slowly grew more and more red from outrage. While Sirius deeply regretted forcing Harry to read this, and was fighting back the impulse to wrench the book away from him to prevent it continuing, he recognized he may not have been able to get these words out himself, as his throat kept vibrating with repulsion, forever unable to kick away the mental image of his little brother, and now someone he'd once called a brother, joining in on this group. There were many times in the past where Harry actually regretted understanding why he'd felt a missing memory and did not appreciate having it returned, and this was definitely one of them. His feelings went beyond just pity for poor Mr. Roberts and his family, who had done nothing to deserve this treatment, but a righteous fury was quickly coming in as well, making him want to draw his wand, his body acting without his conscious mind, telling him to go and help those people. You had the experience. He forced himself to shake that off, though, blinking until the words below him came back into focus, and recognized that however he felt now, he could only deal with the then. Harry wasn't entirely sure he'd gotten through all of that and been completely understood, but he was sure they all got the gist of it by the murderous looks on their faces, somehow increasing. "Please be asleep. Please let that poor thing be asleep," Lily murmured to herself, her nails digging into her own palm. She was wringing her hands so hard. Each of them felt torn in half at that news. Of course they wanted Harry to get out of there, but they wanted Mr. Weasley to stay with him in case things somehow got worse, which seemed impossible at this point. But as they'd all thought that before, and it still somehow happened, they weren't putting it past anymore. Then the other side, which was grateful relief that Arthur and his boys would blow those bloody Death Eaters sky high for what they were doing and make sure Mr. Roberts' family was fine. Understandable that can't apparate to their side, either without risking getting blasted to smithereens. Have to be a group effort, Remus was muttering under his breath, tapping away an insane rhythm on his knee in pure agitation he couldn't be helping. James and Sirius remembered their earlier joke about how they'd wanted to start a riot between the two rival Quidditch teams, and how that had somehow been turned on its head into this catastrophe, and now they just wanted to hear that everyone made it out of this night alive. Lily yelped so painfully, she sounded like she'd been sat on, but she couldn't even pretend to be okay when they all gave her anxious looks. She was picturing those Death Eaters catching up to her son, gagging and dragging him back to that decrepit Voldemort, or any other number of terrible things, all because Ron had somehow gotten hurt. Harry wanted to reassure her. He may feel dread for this night, but he wanted to calm them all down that nothing too bad was going to happen to him. But that felt like he was dismissing what had happened to Mr. Roberts' family, and he wasn't even sure if he was completely right, so he decided to keep going instead. He's going to get trampled like that, Sirius muttered, still jittering in a wholly different way than he had been in just the previous chapter. That was such a mundane thing compared to what they'd been afraid of, it almost caused them to laugh in surprise. Almost. They still felt wound up and wretched, but at least it was a breath of fresh air reminding that everything must turn out okay. Of course, James spat, his hazel eyes lighting furiously. Why am I not surprised? It was probably his parents' idea to do all of that. Won't find anyone in here disagreeing, Harry muttered with such a vicious flip of the page he nearly tore it out. Oh, he's being real subtle, Remus sneered. May as well go out and wave a sign around. Please have Hermione punch him again, please, Lily growled. I don't know. Sirius rubbed his jaw thoughtfully, though his tone wasn't up to its normal teasing levels, even in appreciation of that statement. I think she might just turn a deaf ear in light of what's going on. Harry felt himself stiffen up in even further disgust, the thought of Hermione up there, with Mr. Roberts' family making him want to retch. But he drew on every last drop of confidence he could muster that wasn't going to happen to his sister. Lily shuddered in renewed horror, the color green taking on a whole new light with what could be going on back there. You can't spot a muggle just by looking at them, James ground out through gritted teeth. Though I wouldn't put it past Malfoy, either of them, to shout it out, Remus seethed. Harry felt an acrid taste burning his tongue as he said that for the first time in his life, now knowing how his father felt. Even when you didn't mean it, it would always feel wrong to say. Do the slug curse again, Sirius suggested viciously. You've got a proper wand now. That's being kind, but a nice start, Remus nodded. Or just punch him, James smirked. I'll take either. It did not surprise them this was his reaction, not after everything he'd said and done previously. It was just all the more loathsome to continually hear about it. So proud of you. That's exactly what I was going to say, James sighed. Just put a big owl sign up to say he was right, why don't you? It would be much subtler, Remus hissed. Can't believe Hermione actually did manage to pull you both out of the way after all of that, Lily sighed in honest disappointment. Harry couldn't be out there helping Arthur, but he could at least get his own payback on this pompous child. We really did want to get Hermione out of there after that, though, Harry muttered darkly. I'm not taking that bet, Sirius agreed. Of course you got separated from them, James groaned, rubbing furiously at the ridge of his nose and nearly knocking his glasses off. He was already so upset by this setup. Nothing good had ever came of these three getting separated. Harry successfully butchered that so well, it took Remus a moment to ask, was that French? Yes, Harry muttered with a slight blush. Whether he'd done it on purpose or not, probably not, that actually managed to cause genuine smiles back on all of them for at least this small and funny little distraction. After the last chapter he'd heard about involving several of the foreign schools, Harry didn't need much to put together that must be the French equivalent of Hogwarts. Of course she did. Remus gave a soft snort of delight, remembering how both he and Harry had thought earlier that's how Hermione would come across that information. It what? James squawked in alarm. Harry was gaping down at the book like a fish out of water, padding his own pocket now, and feeling comforted his wand was at least there now. You left it in the tent, or, Sirius began stammering, eyeing Harry like he'd instead said he'd left his glasses behind. Even that would have made more sense. I know I don't think so. The last time I remember having it, he struggled, his mind floundering because he never used it on his summer holiday, but he always kept it in his pocket, so it was an unconscious feeling. He hadn't used it his whole time while at the burrow, but he'd brought it along to the cup. He hadn't used it there either, but it had always been in his pocket. There was an alarm bell going off in the base of his skull, something painful telling him he should know quite well where it had gone, but that was missing like any other important thing he tried to remember. His frustration was clearly growing on his face, so James quickly jumped in by placing a calming hand on his shoulder and soothing. Relax, Harry. I know you find it, and I also know you didn't just leave it lying around. He struggled for a moment, trying to understand what could have happened to it. As a wizard's wand was akin to an extra finger, you were never without it. He couldn't fathom what could be going on, but still persisted. So let's get to that part, where everything gets better again. Harry nodded without any enthusiasm, but at least appreciated they weren't all badgering him about losing it. Be a little worried if it was just randomly lying around, Remus muttered, as wands weren't known for just randomly falling out of pockets. If it had been him who'd tripped over a root, that would have been one thing. But no, he was sure something else besides dropping it was going on. That chamber must have taught Harry about throwing his wand any old place. They shifted uncomfortably, finding these fair enough answers, but still as unusual as it could get, and just as unlikely coming from those two as themselves. Glad you agree, Lily murmured, those horrible visions from before still twisting away behind her mind's eye, now more terrible than ever that her son couldn't magically defend himself. Harry choked as he got that out, going incredibly wide-eyed all over again, but whatever he felt for that description was gone in a flash, and his mind was back to gnawing on what had happened to his wand, something that was causing him an equal amount of pain in his head. No need to add more. Then why was something trying to warn him these two things were connected? Even as Harry said that. Again. This time travel thing made that annoying. He could feel something wasn't right. This was the wrong answer, and still he couldn't grasp hold of it for any reason, and instead forced himself to concentrate on the print, much less painful. Harry nearly sobbed in relief at finally something much lighter for his conclusions to settle on, though he did wonder what about Hermione speaking of house elves would lead to. He greedily latched onto it, though, as he'd nearly developed a second pulse behind his eyes. He'd been thinking so much about things he should know better of by now. Did he even show up? Lily muttered randomly, that never having been noted at all. It was quite rude of him to force his house elf to go up there and never even bother to show. Surely nothing so important could be going on during the actual cup. She's not bewitched, Sirius snorted. She didn't get permission and was probably told not to leave the tent for some reason. That's just part of how they are. So you're okay with Winky getting hurt just because Crouch didn't release her from that command before he ran off? Lily demanded of him in blistering tones. Sirius threw his hands in defeat at once, saying, "Hey, I'm just saying he didn't do it on purpose." Lily still had her eyes narrowed at him, and while Harry would have been more than happy at this rate watching them bicker about this, he also noticed Remus quickly trying to wave him on before the argument could escalate as well, so he sighed and kept at it. Lazy. James raised a brow in surprise. He's just saying it like it's always been for thousands of years. I really don't see what Hermione's so strung up about either. Lily ground her teeth together, but shook her head in furious silence. She understood completely where Hermione was coming from, after watching poor Darby for a whole year and now this. She was really regretting her own life that she hadn't looked into this more. All she'd ever known were the house elves at Hogwarts, treated perfectly well and never a care, and she'd naively believed that all were treated the same. She now realized how ignorant that was, and quite agreed with where she was positive Hermione was heading. There should be a standard for their living as much as anybody's. Sadly, that really was true. Honestly, all three made wonderful targets for any Death Eater. The son of a blood traitor who readily stood by his father and family. The Muggle-born, though not obvious Malfoy at least could point out. And the boy who lived, which went without saying, and wandless. All three of them really needed to keep their heads down. Sadly, that pain popped right back into Harry's temple the moment he was reminded of that, somehow doubling since it had gone away in its persistence. He should be remembering something. In his current mindset, he didn't even notice the light flutter he felt that this detail may have been important later. Guess they're not worried about anything, Lily rolled her eyes. Well, that'll make you forget what's going on behind you, Sirius snorted with derision. Even he had to admit this was a terrible time to be flirting. Congratulations, James rolled his eyes. You should be richer than the richest by next month. Not everyone appreciates that kind of boasting, Lily sniffed, finding that far more sad that this was a needed job than brave or whatever that numbskull was going for. She wasn't even the biggest fan of dragons, and she wasn't fond of the idea of killing them. Right, and you happen to be friends with a dishwasher. Good of you to keep the company, Remus muttered. I'm sure he'll do a better job than the current one, Sirius snorted, while Harry randomly thought he should find that funny, giving a slight snort as he recognized this young man, and finding irony that he in fact would do better. Oh, that's brilliant, Lily snickered. She understood it was the magic of the villa forcing them to want to impress, making them act like fools, but she still found it sad that the way they went about it was lying. At least James never resorted to that in his mad attempts to gain her favor. Not that she was dumb enough to believe half of this bollocks, so it was a moot point. Now that I'd like to see, James laughed. What's the brand you're calling it then, the Zeus model? I'll let you know if he does, Harry promised with an easy smile, thanking once again this light-hearted switch for the reprieve he was getting, no matter how short. I noticed you weren't affected that time, Remus pointed out. Harry just shrugged, muttering, wasn't really paying attention till I heard Stan speak up, then I was too busy laughing. Lily felt like goosebumps were smothering her as she said, well, then perhaps you should go back and laugh at the Villa's admirers a bit more. It's not good for you to be so far out by yourself. Plus, you never caught up to Ron's siblings. I'm sure they're worried about you. Harry wanted to agree, to voice that he had gone back into the more populated areas of the forest, but the words wouldn't come, something he knew he'd regret. The four of them sighed in disappointment. Why did Harry have to be the one to suggest that? Was he trying to make their life more miserable by seeming to go out of his way in his younger self to cause these situations? Sirius was frowning in concern for someone he'd almost call an idol, wondering what on earth could have happened to him. He hadn't been mugged, had he? He'd been carrying around an awful lot of gold for his betting. Had he perhaps run into an unhappy customer about a big loss? He really hoped he was okay, or had bludgeoned whoever it was, causing that other person to look far more than strained. So, he didn't know. Lily raised a brow in surprise. What's he been doing this whole time? It's hardly been subtle, Remus agreed. Maybe he found an old friend and brought her along for some privacy, James smirked, thinking there were plenty of reasons he could be looking tossed around. A very appropriate reaction, honestly, Sirius huffed. Them? They all asked in surprise, Sirius now thinking he may have been closer than he thought, but hopefully Bagman would file a report of it later and get back whatever he deserved. You can't blame him for not being on high alert 24/7, Sirius muttered, grains of pity still lingering for him. Because that just made everything better, Lily snorted. Sirius was more than happy to make a triumphant noise in delight at this news, hoping Harry and Ron would whittle away the boring hours until Arthur found them with Quidditch talk, giving all of them a nice laugh as well. They were still tense and uneasy. They couldn't help it until Harry was back out of that forest and safely back at the burrow. But it was nice that he had Ron and Hermione there in the meantime to keep up distractions like this from the worst of their thoughts. This whole ordeal will be worth it if that's true, Sirius nodded. They will, Remus said at once at the uneasy look on Harry's face. Then they'll make sure they're okay, before most likely giving them a powerful memory charm to erase this terrible instance from their mind. A kindness, honestly, Lily sighed. Otherwise they may have gone mad from this. While true, Lily sighed. They don't care, James finished for her with an ugly look in place. It's all about making a statement with that lot. So long as there were more of them than the ministry who would help, with a nice loud distraction which I'm sure they easily got, they'd keep at it till they had no other choice. Harry was frowning sadly out the window, now wondering just how often events like this occurred in their time. They all went ramrod straight, their hands going instinctively towards their wands, a stupid but involuntary reaction as they heard some stranger was around Harry at this time. James looked like he was visibly restraining himself from snapping as he said, Harry, did you really just ask that? You're supposed to be quiet and stay out of sight at this time, not go yelling, hey, I'm over here. Harry was frowning at him, half feeling chastised that it probably had been a bad idea in retrospect, but also wanting to defend himself that at the time he hadn't seen himself in that much danger. He suppressed it, though they were tense enough, and he really didn't want to pick at this. Don't recognize that, Sirius muttered to himself, not that this made anyone feel any better. There were plenty of terrible curses out there these people had never heard of because they wouldn't go out looking for them. Lily felt a scream rearing up in her throat at the thought of any green spell being set off around her baby, again. Then she felt foolish and embarrassed when he finished, sounding more puzzled than anything. She was being jumpy and paranoid. He was sitting there reading it. Of course he hadn't had the killing curse set on him. It still wasn't helping her nerves one bit, though, just to constantly remind herself. Maybe she'd made more noise than she'd intended to. Maybe Sirius was just getting too fidgety with all of this built-up angst, and he knew he was upsetting his charge. But the next thing Lily knew, she had her baby in her lap, which quickly calmed her down far better than anything else could. Harry was blinking in puzzlement as he finished the description, just knowing he should know what this was called. But when he looked up expectantly in hopes someone would tell him, he instead found all of them with sickly, pale skin and gaping at him like he'd just turned into a corpse. Wire within shouting distance of a Death Eater. Sirius. Throat couldn't seem to decide if it was going to fail him or release a rumbling growl as he got that out. "That's what you got out of that?" Harry asked in surprise. "From some snake in the sky. That's the dark mark, Voldemort's symbol," James managed to stutter out, wondering far too often for his liking how his son had survived to his current age. Only a Death Eater knows how to produce it, so yes. That is understandably the first thing he and the rest of us grasped on. "Oh," Harry simply muttered, unable to think of anything else to add to that. None of this explained what his ever-growing agitation was, something building in the back of his mind that was quite insistently saying he should know this particular Death Eater. But that must be ridiculous. Hopefully, he never got any closer to one of Voldemort's henchmen than he was in that moment. Otherwise, his family really might have a hernia. Deciding to keep reading rather than watching them gasp for air, Harry forged on. "Harry James Potter, you stop that before you give me a heart attack." Lily half screeched, only able to strangle off the full volume because even that scolding of her elder son made his younger counterpart begin crying in protest. Harry was watching her with severe worry, remembering the last time she told him off for something he'd done in the past. At least then, the other boys had helped her to laugh it off, as it had already happened long enough ago her snapping wouldn't do any good. Looking around now, though, he saw they were quite in agreement with her exclamation, which wasn't making him feel any better. Desperately hoping now he had stopped shouting out, or he'd probably regret it in this time. Harry tried to keep going in as calm a voice as possible to remind them all he was perfectly fine. "Least one of you lot has some bleeding sense," Remus hissed, now wishing more than anything Harry hadn't been split off from Arthur, or Sirius had come, or if he'd bothered to keep in contact, anything than this constant mess that was Harry's life, seeming to find the most danger when he was at his most vulnerable. "Does she know what that is?" Sirius asked in surprise. At least that distracted him from picturing that thing being cast right over his little pup's body while he was on the opposite side of the world. "I guess I can see how," James muttered through almost chattering teeth as he was picturing much the same thing. "Wouldn't surprise me if the mark's shown up in a book or two about Voldemort's reign." "Right in one prongs," Remus muttered, shifting his weight with continuing agitation. No matter how much it aggravated his injuries, that flare of pain was a constant reminder he was in the here and now, listening to Harry read this rather than picturing it go a more gruesome way. "Priorities," Lily mumbled, bouncing her infant in her arms to keep them both calm. Harry hadn't believed they could be more upset than they had in just the last book. But when he read that, and their first thought was to jump to the fact that Harry was now surrounded on all sides by Death Eaters like that had been a calling, he was pretty sure his dad, having vomited back during the chamber, would be a kind look back. Harry was quite glad he was the one reading, as when he glanced up all he saw was a mask of shocked faces on convulsing throats like they were all fighting back the urge to scream some more. Most likely their own voices would have failed them at this point. All Harry remembered feeling at the time was shock and the urge to hit the deck, and he reacted first by seizing his friends' necks and pulling them to the ground, screaming, "Duck!" "Anaticular!" Sirius suddenly yelped at his side. Harry looked at him with great concern, like he thought his godfather had finally lost his bleeding mind, but it had the desired effect of causing James and Remus to snap out of their comas and burst out laughing. Lily looked just as confused as he felt, but Harry still had more sense about him as he demanded, "What's that mean?" Sirius had to shake his head a couple of times to make sure his head was on straight and clear before putting on a farce of his carefree nature and explaining, "It's a curse that makes your wand only able to produce ducks for the next few spells. Great laugh while you're running away." He managed to say all of that with only a few minor spasms of shock, still wearing off from picturing all of this being directed at Harry. Remus used it on us once, James added on when it seemed Lily was finally calming back down as well, and hoping to keep them all breathing on this subject for as long as possible, he turned mock angry eyes on Remus and finished in a huffy tone, in the middle of dinner. McGonagall wouldn't believe we hadn't done it on purpose, gave us detention that night, forcing me to reschedule one of my Quidditch practices. You two deserved it, Remus shot back, an old satisfied smirk in place his friends hadn't seen in a while. It was one of you lot's fault I got strung up by my foot and missed my care of magical creatures class that day, and since neither of you would tell me who did it, you both deserved it. Lily was watching between the three with an actual smile in place now, unable to believe she could hold the expression in light of what was happening to her son, but had actually quite enjoyed during school watching the marauders pick on each other much more than watching them go after their prank victims. So hearing retellings like this were always a treat. The distraction had worked. They were all much more grounded and feeling at least less likely to have heart failure as Harry continued. Thank Merlin for those Quidditch reflexes, James murmured. At least that made them all feel better at the situation Harry was in. Certainly not content, but it was nicer to hear he only would have been stunned than something far worse. Arthur, Lily nearly sobbed in relief, knowing that couldn't refer to anyone else. So it was the ministry who went there, James agreed, still looking fairly faint, but at least some color returned to his face as he realized that. I can imagine, Remus nodded, knowing Arthur would have felt the same way they just had of finding his son under that mark. Bite me, James snapped at once, riling up at anyone trying to get in Arthur's way as he checked on those kids. I'll second that, Sirius agreed with a nasty look still in place, wanting to crack all 20 of those ministry fools over the head for shooting at his pup. He actually just looked you in the face and demanded that, Lily growled, her eyes narrowing furiously. You. The bleeding boy who lived. Plus a Weasley and a Muggleborn, the only ones they caught sight of. Oh yeah, it's hard to tell who has more motive in that group, Remus snarked. I'm just hoping they did manage to stun, incompetently but still, the one who did do it, James grumbled, hoping at least some good came of their heart attack moment. He's the one defending you, Sirius snorted. What's he glaring at him for? Mr. Weasley looked just as shocked as anyone else, Harry shrugged. Maybe to Ron it looked more accusatory. At some point you can drop the manners, Remus muttered with an eye roll. All of them scowled heavily at that, finding it completely uncalled for to be pointing a wand in Ron's face when he hadn't even drawn his own to defend himself. At least there are some sensible adults around, Lily sniffed. Oh goodness me, you use an incantation to summon a magical image in the sky. Who would have thunk it? Remus snapped, not being able to press any more sarcasm into that if he'd tried. Great. Good to know it's only 1 out of 20 we should be really worried about, Sirius grumbled. Probably at the exact same time they appeared, so you wouldn't have even heard it, James sighed, mostly in relief whoever that was wasn't around his son anymore. Oh great, now I get 2 people in one clearing to piss me off, Sirius mock cheered, making Harry already long for the carefree chapter they just had and see them really happy again. Or, at least a few of you could go with him. Lily snapped, taking every last bit of her self-restraint not to facepalm in exasperation. They outnumbered that one lone person who was back there, and even if there were more, it was still more safe than just sending one person. Finally, some good news, Remus sighed, actually sagging back in relief, thinking that was one less problem they had to worry about. Harry, though, was wondering why his first reaction was to think Mr. Diggory was wrong. They hadn't gotten anyone that night. But the thought flew away almost at once, and he simply agreed with Remus instead. That didn't seem like a good reaction, though. Sirius frowned in concern. He really still thinks it's those 3 kids. James snapped in disbelief, wanting more than anything to smack Crouch a good one. What? All 5 of them yelped at once. There's no way that little elf did that, Sirius snorted in disbelief. The voice didn't even match, Harry agreed, still frowning deeply as he gently tried to understand why his earlier feeling was clearly right now. What was Winky even doing in that area, though? Lily's frown kept deepening the longer she thought about this. We heard a Death Eater's voice in that direction. It's impossible Winky would be following them around, as she belongs to Crouch. Harry opened his mouth to reply, then thought better of it, and quickly shut it before he vomited instead from the stress of repressing his response. The truth was, none of them had any idea what was going on, and absolutely none of them wanted to find out. They didn't care about this mystery, didn't want to sit on the idea any longer than they had to, because they didn't want it to have anything to do with Harry. They kept hoping any second now Arthur would jump in and say that these kids were no longer needed and take them away back to the burrow for some actual peace. Harry had to blink hard a few times to keep some bright spots out of his eyes, but then kept on after a moment, now working harder than ever to ignore whatever feeling that gave him for whatever reason. They can't really think she did it. James raised an even more disbelieving brow, somehow managing to find this more ridiculous than them thinking it was Harry. She's a house elf. While Lily agreed with him, it was every kind of ludicrous. She didn't much like his tone of saying it. Now why would he think it was me helping the elf? Sirius quickly inserted, ignoring all accompanied groans. I like to think mine's gone off and died by this point. Harry gave him a smile, still not having grown tired of that joke yet, but didn't linger on it either. Had a what now? Lily demanded, sure she'd heard that wrong. Thank you, I hadn't noticed. Lily rolled her eyes. Where's he been this whole time? Sirius asked in confusion, some of the misty-eyed awe of a Quidditch star starting to wear off. I thought the last time he disapparated away was to go help with the riot. He should have seen it at the same time as the rest of these 20 people, and come then. Search us, Remus sighed, thinking they'd had more questions from this chapter alone already building up, and it was clearly driving Harry mad, as he once again went cross-eyed in pain at being unable to answer them. He, along with everyone else, really wanted this chapter to be done with already. So he never did show up, James murmured. That's incredibly odd for him, Lily explained to Harry, who was watching all of the boys holding a puzzled expression. He was a big hand in putting this event together. He was expected to show up for it. Crouch does not miss that type of thing. It wouldn't look good, she finished with a sniff of distaste. Harry felt like he was getting a little tick at the base of his skull, a muscle that just kept spasming every other sentence now, as more and more of what he was hearing he was sure would come to bite him in the arse later. But for now, he thanked his mum and kept going. All four of them mumbled something about how it was bleeding obvious from the start she hadn't a thing to do with this, and they should be out looking for who really did. But none of it was articulate enough. Harry stopped. Is he trying to scare her? Remus' scowl deepened at this, finding this more than uncalled for of the clearly innocent creature. He's certainly not going out of his way to pretend otherwise. Lily nodded in agreement. What? They all yelped, finding that all too common an occurrence recently. How in Merlin's underpants did your wand end up in the same clearing as Winky and a Death Eater? James gasped out first. That sounds like the bad start to a joke, Sirius moaned, rubbing furiously at his forehead to stave away a growing sense of doom. I but you when. Lily could not get out more than one word before her voice failed her, and she just kept looking at her gobsmacked son. But he shook off the shock quicker than she did and continued in a hurry now. Guess that wasn't the best time to go shouting that when they all think it's you, Remus muttered. There really isn't a good time to say that in this circumstance, Sirius reminded. Yeah, that's what he said, Remus snorted, his eyes darkening more and more every second the longer he heard about Diggory. His jumping to conclusions attitude, along with his no-good character, was making Remus edgier the longer this carried on. Damn right you did, James snapped, happy at least Arthur was keeping that man in check. But, Lily finally managed to collect herself to get out a real question, does that mean Winky did take it from you in the top box? She's the only other person outside of your group who had the means to do it. I just cannot for the life of me imagine why. If not, then it's a really big fat coincidence, James sighed, running his hand through his hair in agitation. Of all the people who could be suspected of taking Harry's wand, as the more they heard of this, the more they believed Harry hadn't simply dropped it, and it simply wound up in the grip of a Death Eater to use in the conjuration of the Dark Mark. No one's going to question that she just found it. Sirius scowled, knowing the elf probably didn't have a better answer than that, but he wanted one anyways. Lily began wriggling around in displeasure now, feeling bad she'd thrown out a question regarding Winky herself now, and she wasn't even there. The elf clearly had no more to do with this than Harry. Couldn't they lay off her? Can't say I'm surprised. Remus gave a small smile. She's shown time and again she'll do and say what she thinks is right. In this case, I'm grateful for it. Lily nodded in agreement. That doesn't prove anything, James snorted. She just said she found it, and she's got witnesses proving it wasn't her who used it last. It's been established Harry's wand was the one to use that spell. Showing that off doesn't mean a thing. Harry's heart gave a very hard twist when he read that, for some reason leaning just slightly closer to his dad and glancing up at his mother for a moment, but only had a moment to wonder why before he kept going. Both parents were still so wound up over the situation at hand, neither noticed Harry's second of hesitation. I am going to punch him. Sirius scowled, beginning to tense up on the spot the longer he kept going. I don't even like elves, and I don't talk to them like that. Use some brains, man. She's obviously not got a thing to do with this. Thinking he doesn't need to be working with magical creatures much, James agreed with a serious nod. He clearly looks down on them too much. He's much too quick to blame as well, Lily added on in the same tones as them. Remus couldn't help but give them a light smile they hopefully didn't see. He knew for a fact they could get overly touchy about this without even realizing it. Ooh, snappy. Sirius raised an imperious brow, feeling his point had been made quite well, and he didn't even like the man who'd done it. Little late for backtracking, you hobknocker, James huffed. Glad someone put him down. Lily gave a soft laugh, not having thought she'd be rooting for Crouch any time soon, but at least she found he was useful for something. Harry felt a stirring in him again, like earlier when he'd felt something was off about Crouch speaking of his perfect, unbreakable vows about rules. There was something there that Harry knew he should have a puzzle piece to, but it faded through his conscious like his brain was filled with cracks. You suggested his elf did, Remus smirked, and that's as good as. Oh yes, I'm sure Death Eaters pop by all the time selling cookies and just give a friendly tutoring session of how to do that in the meantime, Sirius snorted. Lily couldn't help cooing again, wanting to do something to help the poor dear relax, as she knew there was no way she would be getting in trouble for anything, or at least she shouldn't be. Well, I don't think he's wrong. James' frown just got deeper as Arthur drew the same conclusions they'd been forced to come to. That hardly explains anything, Sirius grumbled. It actually just raises more questions, Remus sighed. That, Lily struggled for a moment before grudgingly admitting, is a really good point. Wish she'd started with that, Sirius huffed. This could have been going a lot better. Harry had a mad desire to laugh, like he knew Winky was telling the truth in that moment. But leaving something off. I'm truly shocked at how pleased I am. Remus frowned in pity for the poor thing, finding just a grain of irony that the very thing she'd feared would happen to Darby was in fact being hung over her head this very same night. But at least her own master would be a better option. Ouch, Lily winced. After hearing about what the Malfoys had done to Darby, she was actually quite afraid for Winky and what might become of her now. Wow, James blinked spastically like Crouch had just started swearing in Murmish. That was harsh. Yeah, Sirius had his head cocked to the side, his eyes narrowed like he was trying to study Crouch in person. She did disobey, but it's hardly so grievous she should be sacked like that. Remus and Lily exchanged a surprised look. Considering their usual attitude towards elves, they would have honestly expected those two to agree with Crouch. But for all their laughing at the creatures, they clearly weren't as hard on them as they would lead. Harry may have input his opinion on them, but he was too busy fighting back word vomit. There it was again, something involving Crouch and Winky that made him want to spew out something, like a huge silent chunk of conversation had been taken place right in front of him, but he had nothing to offer except to read what was in front of him. Lily looked very much like she would get up and hug Hermione now, as well as shield her, for standing up to Crouch like that in front of everyone. Oh, I get it. Remus gave an ugly sneer now as his eyes flashed. He's not getting rid of her because she didn't listen to him. She's getting the boot because she got caught and dragged Crouch into this. This is terrible, Lily scowled. I don't even understand why he's reacting like this. No one's going to look twice at him now that everything's out in the open. Everyone there knows he's nothing to do with the dark arts. He shouldn't be taking all of this out on his elf like this. Well, we agree, James sighed, feeling like they were hearing about a Derby all over again. How often were these other house elves treated like this? It's no good shouting about it now, dear. She shot him the stank eye, but didn't pursue the point. Sirius and James shared a surprised look. They hadn't even noticed that part. Sirius closed his mouth sheepishly. He'd actually been about to say the same thing, but was now happy he hadn't gotten it out at the flashing look Lily gave the book for Ron's comment. I'm actually a little more surprised Ron didn't know. James quirked a brow. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful he's never seen it, but still, you'd think his parents would have mentioned it. Not necessarily, Remus shrugged. In the same concept as Ron not saying Voldemort's name, Ron and the kids of his generation would have been told as little as possible of what would have been a common occurrence to their parents, us, whatever. The next generation of kids would have been shielded and told as little as possible of the horrors of this war. James pondered that for a moment, not really in agreement as he didn't think this should just be glossed over, but couldn't argue the point much either. They were only 14. James wasn't even happy Harry was so involved with this at that age, so he let the matter slide. Snappy, Sirius gave a small smirk. Probably still worried about the rest of his kids, Lily added, thinking that as soon as Ron was back at the tent, Arthur would probably go looking for the twins and Ginny, most likely as his eldest three were now doing. They all released a sigh of relief. They hadn't exactly been worried for their safety, but it was good nothing had happened nonetheless. Harry's tone was already pitching in surprise, but he read out all of the injuries before he asked, what could have happened to them? Probably some of the Death Eaters shot some spells back, Remus sighed. Either that or the riot got a little more hands-on than wands. Well, Bill at least knows what it is, James muttered to himself, thankful that it clearly wasn't going to be erased from history what was going on now. He'd be satisfied if only the older type of kids knew about it then. That about summed it all up, yeah, Lily sighed, running a hand through her hair in agitation. Was a lot more bloody traumatizing to hear about it, James grumbled. I can't decide who more deserved what was caught on, Remus snorted. Fred, Sirius said instantly, knowing he'd happily side with the twins than their immediate older brother any day. I'll agree with you now, Remus rolled his eyes. Well, that's just sad. Lily frowned slightly, always having suspected Percy didn't get along with his brothers very well, but for an outsider of the family like Hermione to so obviously be doing a better job really got to her in that moment. Run amok, Sirius repeated in disbelief. I'm still confounded what Crouch did, blowing that out of proportion. Though I guess I'm not that surprised Percy's agreeing with his boyfriend, he finished with a rude little curl of his nose. Of course she did, Lily snorted, that felt like Hermione's answer to everything, causing the four around Harry to shiver, leading him to wonder and smother the question all at once who they'd found this mark hovering over. He decided he didn't want to know. Lily paled to the color of new snow, cuddling her baby all the closer to her. Remus and James winced like they'd just been socked in the gut, but Sirius had the worst reaction. He'd lived that nightmare vividly in his dreams the previous night, coming over to find James and Lily. The only reason that mark had been absent was because no one was left alive to cast it. Coupled together with the one responsible for it, he made a keening noise, shaking his head violently to get rid of that. He kept seeing it every time he closed his eyes. No need to dwell on it when he could give an unconvincing smirk to them now that he was just fine and could play this off as long as he dared. Okay, I'm appeased. Ron and Harry get it now, James murmured, deciding he'd never complain again about something Harry didn't know involving this type of thing, giving them all a sigh of relief again. They had not forgotten what had started this whole mess, and it was a very good thing that Bill hadn't mentioned they'd been injured. Best thing that can happen to them. Remus gave a sad shake to his head, wanting to strangle every last one of those Death Eaters all over again at the thought of those poor muggles suffering through that. Who else would it be? Sirius asked, wishing to mark, but the tone wouldn't come as he would have been glad for an alternate answer. Please stay that naive forever, Lily mentally sighed, brushing her baby's hair from his forehead for just a moment as a reminder that Scar wasn't there yet. While she never wanted it to, it was clear how much fiction that dream was since Harry hadn't even asked this now. He hadn't questioned this terrible act. Even at his regrowing pace of learning, he was already so much more aware of the crueler side of the world than Lily would ever wish her child to know. I thought it was a fair question, Harry said with a shrug, as he'd been wanting to ask it as well, but wondering if Ron would for him since he'd had a similar face to what Harry was feeling at the time. Sirius gave a twisted little smirk that honestly scared the others. They didn't really want to know what his mind had jumped to, but it wasn't hard to picture either. One Death Eater in particular stuck out to all of them now, picturing that pathetic little rat and his hatred of being returned to his master. Those other loose Death Eaters would probably get much the same treatment if they ever found out any remnant of Voldemort existed. Not that they hoped this at all. The less people out helping Voldemort, willingly or not, the better. My guess is a combination of the two, Lily offered with a small frown, still hating to linger on this subject, but that was a good question. They'd be showing off that they were winning, but warning it was time to go as well. I'm still trying to shake the feeling it wasn't left over a dead body, Remus shuddered, and that individual wasn't doing some old-time celebrating of his own. Thank you, Sunshine, James groaned. That one was terrible, Sirius snorted in true amusement again. I never understood why you tried to pitch an opposite of our nicknames that day. Thought it added an extra layer of mystery, James shrugged, managing to return the smile. Lily's teeth started chattering as she huddled into herself, keeping her baby wrapped protectively in her arms and never wanting to let go. None of them had put those two things together until just now, but Harry was right, and they couldn't have felt worse about it. Nothing good was the one thought that ran through all of their minds for his thought, and yet none of them could bear to say it in hopes they were wrong. For the first time since this had started, James felt no spike of jealousy in hearing Harry's first thought of help flit to Sirius. He'd happily take the idea Sirius was out there worrying about Harry like this. James decided right, then he wanted more than anything for Harry to work out with Dumbledore and the Weasleys that he'd in fact gotten a new dog, and it would be with him at all times now. He'd take every minor annoyance in the world from his brother. If he could have some more reassurances, Harry would just be that little more safe. Harry gave one last deep sigh of discontent, already longing for that happy mood of the last chapter as he gave the book to Remus. I recognized Harry should have questioned this long before now. It has been mentioned many times before, but even I forget sometimes Harry shouldn't have some knowledge that seems obvious. Can't go back and fix it now. Just put all previous mentions of them not being questioned by Harry down to the fact that he worked it out himself, considering the light they were being discussed in. No, really though, did anyone else besides me read this moment and think, horror movie alert, Harry is officially the dumb blonde of the series. Chapter 10, Mayhem at the Ministry. Chapter text guest Peyton asked, are the chapters not titled because it's a side effect of Harry's memory problem, or is it because it's considered copyright? I'm not actually sure if using the chapter titles is copyright, but I don't personally use them because I feel like it spoils too much. Take, for example, the Dark Mark. If they'd read that at the beginning chapter title, they would have known to expect it the whole time, and it would have ruined the whole big reveal of the chapter. I like to keep the suspense as long as I can get away with it. Thank you all as always for your endless support of this fic. Remus did not look pleased one little bit about accepting the book. He hated how they'd grown almost content, getting so many pleasant chapters in a row, and then the huge finale of the cup, just to have such a terrible one right after. He was terrified the trend would continue, but being afraid of something had never actually stopped him from doing anything, let alone in regards to a book, so he kept going. Lily's mind flickered back to her earlier worry that too many memory charms couldn't be good for him, and to have something so powerful taken away as well, oh, she really hoped he would be okay. Cannot blame them, Remus sighed. Least they didn't have to wait on the Diggories, Sirius sniffed. Marley, they all muttered in surprise. Considering the time, it was a wonder she was awake. But even more surprising was that this reaction meant she knew what had happened already. Upon reflection, though, the four of them weren't that surprised. The Daily Prophet was known for staying on top of the news, though not always in the best light. Ooh, Lily sighed, completely understanding why she'd feel particularly awful for those two. Think now would be a good time to drop the bomb they won a gambling bet, Sirius smiled weakly. I don't think they're getting quite as much trouble for it. Lily shot him a look, but as his joking tone hadn't quite smothered his own happiness at the scene, she didn't say anything. This is really sweet, Remus smiled widely without a trace of humor. Bet it only lasts a day before they find some new way to tick her off, James chuckled. not really able to pick up his own, poking fun at the situation. All the standard tosh of the paper, Sirius snorted. Harry felt a vile shot of annoyance at once, a scowl appearing when he heard that name, but it was diminished as always when Remus kept reading, so he chose not to pay it any attention. Causing all four boys to crack up laughing, they were all liking Bill more and more as this kept on. There was no more information to give, Lily scoffed. Why do I get the feeling Arthur has previous experience with this writer? Sirius asked. She certainly sounds more like a tabloid than a reporter, Remus grumbled. I'm sure that'll be the highlight of his day, James sneered. No one in the ministry would know it was Arthur who said that. Lily arched a brow in surprise. This Rita person could have pulled that comment out of the air. Arthur really doesn't have a reason to feel so responsible. James nodded in agreement. He didn't do anything wrong. They all eagerly shut their trap in hopes Marley would say yes to that one. Then they started to get a little fidgety, all eyes flickering to Sirius and away. Sirius tried for a scoff, scolding all of them. Oh, relax, just because I haven't responded already. He hesitated for a moment, wavering and trying to come up with a reason for himself before asking Harry, how long did it usually take me to reply? Less than 2 weeks. Harry gave a shrug he didn't really feel. See, Sirius really did relax back this time. I haven't even gotten his letter yet. Are you lot really going to be freaking out the day I'm late? Yes, was the collective mental answer all of them had, but none of them bothered to answer him aloud. They'd take the paranoia and be wrong with relief every time than think for even a second Sirius had been captured. None of them could stand another year like the last one. Absolutely subtle, Sirius started to snicker, then switched to scowling at his two friends when they wouldn't quite watching him with unease. If they didn't lighten up, he was going to have to start doing something drastic. It's good you know your friends so well, James muttered, finally turning away from Sirius. He wasn't done worrying about him yet, and frankly he wouldn't be until his name was cleared, but at least this was a mildly entertaining distraction. Lily really did start laughing at that. Harry's spot on imaginary Ron had been perfect. Remus managed to spit out that name with the same amount of contempt he would have with the word mudblood, or werewolf, or a number of things he wished he'd never in his life have to mention again. I get the feeling they could have filled in that blank, James mumbled, wiggling just that little bit closer to his son, no matter how stupid he may have deemed it in retrospect. Lily was doing a remarkable reenactment of that expression now, and she had the knowledge Harry was going to be fine. It was still making Harry feel just as bad for his mum as his friend, but was unable to help soothe either of them. Why? Why on earth can't we just have 1 year where we don't even have to mention Voldemort's name? Remus groused. Because my life would be too boring otherwise, Harry muttered. Haven't been able to forget it yet, but thanks for the reminder, Sirius muttered. That prophecy had nearly been his undoing, and even when he'd found out it hadn't related to him, it was not a pleasant look back. You never told them she made a real prophecy? James asked in surprise. Never got around to it, Harry shrugged, giving Sirius an absent nudge as he said. Had some other stuff on my mind that night, and then I was trying to forget about it there at the end. Sirius, though, had something much more entertaining to say, as he gave his best friend a superior smirk and demanded, So you do admit prophecies are real now? Can't hardly deny it when Harry had one smacked in his face, Remus sighed, already being able to tell where this was headed by Sirius' pompous tone. Then you owe me years of apologizes for calling me a loon in believing in them, Sirius crowed, his smile stretching wider every second as he glanced from one friend to the other. Go on, I want to hear you say it now. Prophecies exist. Oh, knock it off, Snuffles, Harry sighed. For some reason, the idea of Sirius talking about this was setting him on edge, but even as he finished, he ended on a pained hiss and went cross-eyed, trying to understand why he'd call Sirius that. After blinking away a few bright spots, he saw he wasn't the only one. Now, why would you know that name? Remus asked first. I only called him that a half a dozen times, back in our 4th year. I've never heard this one. James raised an even more surprised brow at his two friends. Sirius shrugged with nonchalance as he said, It was during our Christmas break, and I got a head cold. Kept sneezing and body parts kept randomly turning into a dog. We didn't master our transformations until 5th year, Sirius added on for Harry. Remus kept laughing about it every time and started calling me Snuffles all week. By the time He broke off with an old wince at the fact he couldn't add on the other name without substituting a swear word. Got back. The joke had died off. Harry nodded in understanding, but none of this answered their original question. Why on earth Harry would know any of that? The whole matter had successfully distracted both Sirius and Harry, though, so Remus decided to keep reading now while he still could. Now Remus regretted it and wanted to go back to admitting Sirius had been right about something. It was certainly easier to stomach than thinking on that. Through a red haze he glanced up and saw the other four were a mask of boiling hatred again. So Remus collected himself and put on the most tragic face he could muster as he said, "All right, Padfoot, I admit you were right about prophecies. Never again shall I argue with your unending knowledge about this," he quickly tacked on, already knowing he was going to regret giving in the moment Sirius attempted to replace his bloodlust with a satisfied smirk. It didn't really work. His jaw was still clenched too tightly for the expression to look natural, but the fact he even attempted a smile made it feel worth it to Remus. Why on earth would they think that? James demanded at once, far more up for pestering his best mate than giving in to him. You hardly know the difference between devil's snare and mandrakes. Oi, Sirius hooted. What's those evil little plants got to do with knowing about this dark stuff? I know plenty about that more than you. James looked like he was about to keep pressing in, with a highly amused audience of Remus and Harry, but Lily gave Remus a hard nudge and waved him on, still wanting to get through this chapter more than watch them snip at each other no matter how much it made her feel better. James kept his superior expression in place, even as that feeling of jealousy returned, still wishing in vain he could have replaced that sentence with his own name. Oh, that's a brilliant idea, Lily sighed, because one life or death experience isn't enough for you in a 24-hour period. Stop exaggerating, Lily, Sirius snickered. Quidditch is good for him, helps him work out the nerves. I get the feeling she has to use that voice often, Remus chuckled. Oh, yes, he does, Harry laughed, the idea of trying out that move again now still present. Best to cut her off before she could keep going like that, James snickered. She'd be tucking you into bed before you knew it. I'm sure there were some other things mixed in there. Lily rolled her eyes, on complete agreement with Hermione on that. I swear that's the description you give after everything he says, Sirius snorted. And he doesn't deserve it one bit, Remus agreed. What an idiot, Lily scoffed. Did he really think he could get away with that? I've heard of stupider things he's tried, James shrugged. Unlike before, where he'd still felt too unsure to hardly even speak up, Harry had no qualms this time inserting himself into the conversation and asking, "How do you guys know him?" in hopes to ease some of the pressure in his skull telling him he should know that name anyways. He's an old friend of Dumbledore's, Remus shrugged. Does a lot of things for the Order most members either can't, or won't, do because they don't have the same connections. Friend is putting it lightly, Sirius snorted. Dumbledore keeps bailing him out from the stupider crimes he gets caught doing, so Mundungus does whatever he asks. Then he turned to Harry and put much more bluntly, he's a criminal, never made an honest living in his life, but he's pretty fun to have around. Dung's always been good for a laugh, and he can get you some really cheap things most won't normally go after. You are not endearing me, Harry finally laughed to show he'd gotten the message. All of this helped somewhat. He was now quite sure this was the same way he knew the same man, but there was still something missing. A connection he was sure he had to the name, but of course that wouldn't come to him. I love that, Lily said instantly, her eyes brightening with want. I wonder how they got a hold of that. James ruffled up his brow thoughtfully, his mind already spinning with the idea he'd like to recreate that for his family, that nasty little pang reminding him of the count of hands he'd have now rather than if he'd heard about this just a week ago. It was an anniversary present for Mrs. Weasley, Harry said. I think Mr. Weasley made it, though I have no idea how. Fascinating, Lily said honestly, adding this to her growing list of things she had a mind to say to the Weasleys when she planned to meet them in person. I do wonder, though, Remus said with some surprise, why she was so worried about her family if she had that. It would have said whether anything bad had happened to them. Asterisk. There's a difference in a clock telling you and seeing them in person, Lily said mildly. Besides, Sirius shrugged, considering the time they arrived back, I'll bet you she just saw that paper and sprinted out the back to wait. I don't think that would have crossed her mind till later, and they came back soon enough she didn't have time to check. Lily couldn't help but snort, thinking, oh, that's lovely. Sounds handy, Sirius snickered. That's where your hand would be all year, Lily shot back. Sirius went wide-eyed and pressed his hand to his heart as he cooed at her. Oh, Lily, you put my name up there. Don't flatter yourself, she tried to say with a straight face, though the effect was ruined by her twitching lips. Why would Mr. Weasley's job be involved in that? Harry asked in surprise. If he just informs people about what Muggle stuff is. Lily wasn't 100% sure herself, as she'd personally never even spoken to Arthur in real life, and only had a vague idea of where his office even was in the Ministry. But she knew for a fact she had to send owls down there all the time for other things besides just what a Muggle object was, so she offered. It's a bit more than that, dear. I don't think you quite realize how often wizards, mistakenly or not, involve themselves in Muggle affairs. Whatever any department does, Arthur would have to make sure to check it over and make sure it doesn't interfere with anything to do with Muggles. This dark mark business. Lily heaved a huge sigh, in sympathy for the Ministry falling into even a portion of the pandemonium. It was on a daily basis to her in this timeline. It causes all sorts of mayhem at the Ministry to keep that sort of thing under wraps from the Muggles, no matter how far away they were. All those wizards panicking and fleeing the scene, for instance, apparating away in their panic, and landing in Muggle neighborhoods, for instance, could have shocked any number of them. You see where I'm going. She finished with an expectant look. Harry nodded in understanding, his sympathy for the Weasley patriarch suddenly doubling. James' mouth opened with a little pop as he gasped. Is Percy really agreeing with the Ministry over his own father with that nonsense? What a little prat, Sirius nodded with a heavy scowl in place. He is the head of his department, Remus snapped, stunned that he was defending Arthur from one of his own kids. Bloody hell, he remembered this random snap of information from when Ron had said it 2 books ago. How could Percy be acting like this? Lily had always had the most sympathy for Percy. She found his position in the family more sad than annoying like the rest of the boys seemed to. But even she was getting a little fiery over the way he was acting now. There was no excuse of taking your job's side over your family's. Harry's thoughts were in perfect alignment with his mother's, wondering why on earth all of this Percy talk felt like a bad omen. That was a quick distraction, all of them vividly remembering the last time Ron had been mentioned playing chess. At least this time the pieces weren't life-sized. Harry gave a happy smile at this, saying, Bill was the only one who could play Ron and actually be a threat to him. Well, this woman's just getting more and more charming, Remus scoffed. I get the feeling that must be a daily occurrence, Sirius snorted, brushing his hair out of his own face. Why would he need to fix a fireproof anything? Harry asked in surprise, having been too invested in his own project at the time to ask. It can still get worn out even when it's not set on fire, Lily shrugged. I'm sure Charlie has to do that on his own all the time, considering how little he's home. Subtle, James snorted, thinking they'd at least have the sense to make more order forms outside of their mother's point of view. I think they're just asking for another argument, Remus nodded. Right, Sirius exaggerated the word to the extreme. Now that I'll believe, Lily snorted. Can't restart what they never gave up on, Remus smirked, as clearly no matter what their mother said, those two had this in the works for some time. Lily gave a small sigh. She didn't really think it was right to pick on their mother for that reaction she'd had, but it didn't erase her own laughter blending in with the boys at their picking. Did he really need to add that? Sirius muttered, fighting down the compulsion more with every line he spoke to smack Percy. If that did happen, his grounds of clothing his elf would make a bit more sense, Sirius quirked a brow in surprise. So I guess if you think about it, he was just doing that preemptively. I cannot believe you're really going back and saying that was okay, Lily balked at him. Sirius rolled his eyes at her and said, What? I still think they were over the line treating her like that, but we all know Crouch has such a large stick up his arse it's not really surprising he'd think that way. If you consider the way he is now, I wouldn't be surprised one little bit the second something dark is connected to his name, he'd throw it to the wolves. You're depressing me, Lily sighed, slumping back into the couch without argument for that. Harry was getting a bubbling feeling in his gut. Something in him telling him Sirius was very close to the mark, and none of them realized it. But of course he couldn't begin to imagine details of what this was. James scoffed as he snapped, "I wouldn't be surprised if Percy just said that and no one argued with him. Well, yes, he's right." He rolled his eyes. "You don't need to go shouting at them for it." Sirius couldn't help a surprised little snort of laughter. That's what Hermione had caught on. No one else would bat an eye at that part. "Hey," James waved his hand vaguely. "I think Hermione's exaggerating the term a bit." "I don't," Lily snapped at once. The more she heard about this, the more she was kicking herself for never having looked farther into this. What's so different with house elves and treating people that same way? The practice of house elves being attached to wizarding families goes back centuries. Sirius rolled his eyes. It's practically as common as wizards themselves. Just because it's old and traditional doesn't make it right, Lily ground out. You're saying that these beings that are clearly as human as Remus shouldn't be treated the same. "Hey," Remus yelped, "don't drag me into this." His eyes were getting wider the longer this dragged on. He actually began edging away from Lily as he sensed a true fight coming on, and he did not want to be in the middle of this. Sirius was clearly getting angry now, his glare actually holding some real threats of violence if she kept this up. She shouldn't have dragged Remus into this. His voice came out more of a growl now. "That's not fair, and you know it. Don't you take a shot at him when they're two completely different things." "How?" Lily insisted, her eyes narrowing, clearly showing she wasn't going to back down one bit. "You tell me how treating something as lesser than you as a slave isn't that far off the mark how werewolves are treated, like a pariah." "Okay." James finally got out louder than them. The baby in Lily's lap, already squirming in agitation at all of the raised voices, actually began wailing then, causing Lily to break away her glare and begin soothing her son, admittedly still more flushed than usual. James wasn't looking much better himself, alternately scowling at his wife for making Remus clearly so uncomfortable and Sirius refusing to back down and just let the matter go. "You two knock it off. There's no sense acting like this towards each other. Let Remus finish this chapter, then you two can have it out somewhere where we don't have to hear it." Lily finally convinced baby Harry to stop crying by then, sitting back into her seat and still throwing haughty looks at Sirius, which he was returning. Harry and his father exchanged an uneasy look. James had been hoping that someone cutting them off would make one of them admit it was time to let this go, but that clearly wasn't the case. Remus still looked a little shell-shocked, but at a nod from James, he decided to keep going. "I should take notes," Harry mentally thought, still frowning at all four of them. He'd seen them argue before, and he never liked to watch it. "You said yourself she normally takes twice that long," James sighed, running his hand through his hair in agitation, as if he needed another thing to worry about. "Well, yeah, but I don't know. I was kind of hoping, since this one was kind of urgent, he'd find a way to get a reply quicker," Harry offered with a shrug. Lily's skin tone went back to normal, and then a few shades paler in shock. This was not the first, nor certainly the last, time she'd been ticked off at Sirius for some careless comment he made. But she was suddenly struck once again by this horrid future they were listening to, and realizing these little spats they had maybe numbered. It didn't completely erase her agitation towards him, but it certainly made the want of cursing him lessen. Remus flinched as he got that out, but Sirius quickly jumped in and soothed them all with a smug smile. "Oh, please. Those numbskulls couldn't find the broad side of a barn. There's no way they're going to find me." "Your confidence is instilling," James muttered, unable entirely to stop his leg twitching in agitation. "And there's that," Harry sighed, trying to show that had comforted him a lot more than it had. He really didn't like to think of Sirius being captured. It set him on edge in the worst way, though thankfully he wasn't getting any kind of feeling about this. So this must mean it never happened to him, right? Lily just couldn't seem to erase a frown from her face this chapter, the expression only increasing as she got her own shot of envy at Molly doing all of this for her son. She'd have loved nothing more than for the simple task of going to Diagon Alley for her son, while he and his father went to that cup. And this little reminder it had been someone else smarted more than she'd been expecting it to with her current mood. That was such a random thing that Remus finally broke the bad vibe of the room with a snort of mirth, all five of them cracking a real smile at Ron for some deranged reason being handed a lacy dress robe. "Wonder why," James said just a tad too loudly, hoping to keep on this laughing mood as long as possible. Think Hogwarts is hosting a dance. Harry felt a buzz ring through him, somehow knowing his dad wasn't too far off, but also getting the impression it wasn't an event he was fond of. I think it would be a nice idea. Lily couldn't help a little smile now, warming to the idea the more she spoke. Perhaps a Valentine's Day thing. I always said Hogwarts should indulge in more school events. From memory, every time they've tried, it's been a disaster, Remus snickered. I've heard tale of this one time they tried a school play over some fairy tale novel that didn't end well. Won't know until Harry gets there, Sirius cut in, perhaps still being a little more surely than was called for, but still too agitated to admit it. Lily shot him another glare. She'd been trying to play nice, but clearly Remus took that as a hint to move on now while he still could. Just like that, eh? James raised a brow in surprise, forcing some good mood at Sirius whether he wanted it or not. I'd like to see that. I'm sure seeing his father in lace would make Ron feel better. Harry gave a happy laugh at the image, while Sirius did crack a smile for James' benefit. That'll be a day at Hogwarts, Remus snickered, causing Sirius to really laugh this time, along with the other three, while Harry went beet red in surprise and fear for what this could mean. Which is how most dress robes look, James cackled. So I don't know what was running through Marley's head with Ron in mind. The smile trickled off of Lily just a bit, though, not having to think hard on why the idea of Marley picking out that for Harry would give her a pang of sadness, causing all of them to stop smiling at once. It wasn't so funny now that they realized that. Wish I'd just done it. They couldn't argue the point once it's in there, Harry muttered, fidgeting in place. That's why you don't ask permission, James smirked. It's nice to see Marley with a sense of humor, Sirius sighed. Remus closed the book uneasily, looking between Sirius and Lily like he still expected a bomb to go off, being as clear and silent as he could the chapter was over, then looking longing at the door like he wanted to make a run for it while he could. For warning you guys now, the next chapter won't actually be a chapter, but an actual argument between Lily and Sirius about the house elf topic. I set it up to much too, just have them keep avoiding it, and since it keeps coming up so much in this book, I decided I'd get their views up and as clear as possible now. Thank you all as always for your endless support of this fic. No spoilers, but oh my god, the cursed child. I'm thinking about waiting until the next reading chapter and posting my opinion on it. Or do you think that's a little cocky? Do you guys even really care what I think about it? Question offered by Mana 999. If you guys have any questions, even from one of the older books, or just something you'd like to point out and seen discussed, I implore you to say something. I love them all. Chapter 11, House Elves. Chapter text to Lionshot. I did read your review. I treasure and reread every review I get, and yours caused a nice warm feeling to flush through me and last through the rest of a not very good day. I thank you very much for the kind words. Warning, this chapter is pure headcanon. There's never been any official statement from J.K. Rowling explaining the house elf thing, so this is my answer to it. I am not for slavery. I do not approve of owning anything with even a glimmer of human intelligence, and all views I express through the characters do not necessarily reflect my views or opinions on these matters. These are just how I picture these characters talking about this. Lily took several deep breaths before starting in a peaceable tone. All right, Sirius, explain to me why this is apparently okay. No one needed to ask what she meant. She'd clearly taken James at word and wanted to have a real argument about house elves with Sirius. Remus decided to scupper before his name could be tossed around again and muttered something about the baby, plucking him away from Lily and quickly exiting the room. James really wanted to join him, but thought it was best if he sat down and refereed these two. Harry just wanted to know more about this. Sirius rolled his eyes at her tone. He found it more condescending than neutral as he snapped. I don't know how to nicely put this for you, Evans. Potter, James quickly corrected, clearly never growing tired of doing so, but both ignored him. But house elves are stupid, plain and simple. They can't bleeding do a thing unless they're told. Hell, they can't even take care of their life long term. Why do you think Darby came up with all those cockamamie plans? House elves don't understand the concept of a plan. If they didn't have wizard families telling them what to do, they'd die off at the first sign of danger. I don't understand how you can say that, she seethed. Already cracks were appearing in her calm facade. Goblins aren't treated like that, nor centaurs or were at Sirius' peeved look and a warning shake of his head from James, Lily decided to quit with the list and press her point. Have you ever even given them a chance? How the bloody hell do you just know they're that way? Darby is the best example for both points, Sirius cut her off. They're not all treated like Darby, Sirius sighed, running his hand through his hair in agitation. Truth be told, he actually didn't get into that many arguments, so he wasn't even sure how to win one. Sure, he snipped at his friends on a daily basis. Yes, he spent the majority of his life telling people what he thought without remorse, but an actual structured disagreement like this was not his forte. Plus, he wasn't even sure what Lily wanted out of this. He just knew he wanted her to stop glaring at him every time they were mentioned. In fact, most of them are treated fairly well, like mine. Creature effing adores my mum and Regulus. He's all too happy to parrot what they say and do anything they ask. He just hates me because my mum does, and I don't conform to what she, and by extension he thinks. You mentioned he's been beaten, though, Lily wheedled, thinking she'd finally found a way to make Sirius understand. Even if he didn't like his house elf, surely he must admit that wasn't right. Sirius, though, just snorted and waved his hand around without a care. Beaten is an exaggeration. He never even had to do some of the things to himself Darby did, and they were for stupid little things. Like he was seen during a house party, or he creased my dad's trousers the wrong way. It never went so bad he tried to run away or anything. Plus, my parents are loons who'd beat the wall if it looked like it did something wrong. They shouldn't be the mark of how most are treated. Sirius didn't appreciate that the next expression he registered on Lily was pity, and not for the house elf that time, but for him, so he kept going just a tad louder. Plus, the Malfoys aren't any effing better. No, most are treated like Winky, and they enjoy their life. You've been down to the kitchens. You know the Hogwarts elves are treated just fine. Lily sighed as she rubbed at her temple. This wasn't going anywhere, but she wasn't going to stop now that Sirius had spoken the root of her problem. That's not the point, Sirius. Just because they're happy doesn't make it right. They've lived their whole lives being that way, so they don't know any better. What would you do then? Sirius snorted. Outlaw the owning of house elves. Force everyone to sack them. You'd cause mayhem, woman. House elves would be losing their minds. And even if by some miracle they didn't all die of shock, any future house elves wouldn't be any better because all generations would have the same mindset. Except now they'd be bitter they couldn't be doing what they were meant to. Think of what Hogwarts alone would be like. The castle would crumble without those elves keeping it up. Lily fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. She really didn't know where she wanted to go with this. She just couldn't stand the ideas of more Darbys out there. She'd like to think that wizards were above owning other living things as property, but knowing how some Muggle-borns were treated by purebloods, and purebloods were the main cause of her ire against house elves, she really couldn't see it going in any great way. So instead she gently offered, well, I still don't see why some laws shouldn't be in place, to at least acknowledge you shouldn't be so cruel to them. There should be standards for their living. Punishments shouldn't be so horrid and frequent an elf fears its masters. They should have a voice in the ministry if they feel they've been wronged, just like anything. Sirius just shrugged, but slouched back to indicate he at least wasn't going to argue that point. He still didn't have any great hate towards the actual species. They'd been friendly enough to him at Hogwarts, but Darby and Creature in particular irked him. Darby because he tried to blow his godson's head off with a bludger, and he still couldn't forgive that particular transgression, no matter the end results. Harry had enough crap going on in his life for a friend to be adding. Sure, he'd redeemed himself by attacking Lucius at the end of that year, so he supposed Darby at least balanced himself out. Creature, on the other hand, he knew he'd never give two nuts about. All he ever saw in that thing was his parents' ideals. They had always treated Creature even better than Sirius, like that stupid thing was a better son than he was. Sirius had never endeared himself to his parents even at a young age. He'd always asked one too many questions and been punished for it, often far worse than some simple transgression the elf would do. As a child, he'd hated Creature for the small smiles he'd see his mum give to the elf because he never got that. The older he got, the more he realized his mother actually cared more for that thing than her oldest child. Still, though, he supposed he wouldn't want his agitation at that vile little thing to be put on other elves who didn't deserve it nearly as much. The other three kept watching him like they expected some revelation to take form in front of them, and Sirius' only response was to smirk. What? If Lily wants to go on some crusade to save house elves, I'm not going to stop her. Just wish she'd stop giving me death glares like I'm the one beating them with a stick in the meantime. Lily wanted to explain that she so often got mad at Sirius because he acted one way, but she knew damn well he was thinking something else. She'd suspected once in a while his upbringing hadn't been that dissimilar from Harry's honestly, and she hated to think on it. Sirius didn't speak about it much, though. He actually kept himself as restrained as Harry around her at least, so she was left to wonder if he wasn't projecting most of his hatred he had at his name onto house elves. She wanted to ask him about it, but she didn't feel she had the same right. Harry was her son. Whatever Petunia, or by extension Vernon, had done to him, she had a right to know. Sirius was just her friend. He should tell whoever he wanted about that type of thing, and she wasn't sure if she asked what kind of answer she'd get. Nothing had really been resolved between the two, but since they'd said their piece, neither looked ready to blow a gasket anymore. James had certainly relaxed back. Watching them bicker at each other was certainly more normal to him. Harry, though, was watching Sirius with interest. He, like Lily, had picked up on some of his comments and was wondering just what Sirius had gone through to hate his own elf so much, and he wanted to ask, but thought he'd be a hypocrite if he did. After all, he hadn't even told what the Dursleys had really done to him. They were all saved the trouble from anyone having to say anything else by Remus poking his head back in and saying, I haven't heard any shouting or limbs being pulled apart yet. Is it safe to come back? I don't know. Sirius mockingly rubbed at his jaw as he eyed Lily critically. Lily's still in the same room with me, and we all know that's a disaster waiting to happen. Remus gave a snort as he walked back to Lily's side, happily flopping down beside her and cuddling the baby to his chest as he said, I'll risk it. As it's her turn next, I don't think she can do anything too grievous to you. Hope you guys don't think too harshly of me for this chapter. Not 123,456 is the one who originally came to this conclusion, but the more I thought about it, the more I really liked it. After all, Hermione eventually quit Spew. After all those years of passion, she gave up on the idea, and instead just made a standard of living for them. Why did she quit on the idea? She must have learned something new in her own later years that no one would have explained to her. My idea is that she never got into this with Sirius, and Remus wouldn't really know any more about it than Lily because he never looked into it either, so she came to realize what Sirius said on her own in the end. Maybe she did get a few free and realized the end results. Also, sorry it kind of went into a character study on Sirius there at the end. Actually, no, I'm not. I love him too much to apologize for basing a chapter around just him. Second to last thing, as all of you agreed you would like to hear my thoughts on Cursed Child, that will be in Maya N in the next chapter. Thanks again. Sorry guys, I know you're all wanting Harry to share what really happened at the Dursleys, but I have a specific spot in mind, which many of you have guessed already, where that will be shown. Back to actual chapters next time. Chapter 12, Aboard the Hogwarts Express. Chapter text. I'm glad that my thoughts on Cursed Child ended up at the end of this chapter, because this one in particular doesn't have much else going for it. Hope you still enjoy. Before she got started, Lily first turned to Remus and said, I am sorry for making you uncomfortable, dear. I thought you'd be an easy way to get through to Sirius. He just gets sensitive, Remus smirked, watching Sirius narrow his eyes at the pair of them and ignoring the fact that he didn't act much better. I wasn't offended. I knew you didn't mean anything by it. Lily smiled warmly at him before turning to her chapter. Why? Sirius asked at once, a happy smirk in place, as he always enjoyed watching common things amaze Harry. Ah, James joined Sirius in smirking now. As common as flu travel was to Harry now, he guessed it hadn't occurred to him you didn't always have to go all the way. Remus let out a surprised snort of laughter as he realized Lily, and by extension Arthur, meant that as a name. Who on earth goes by the name of Mad-Eye? Sirius demanded with a wicked grin, clearly indicating he'd like to meet him, and at once silencing Harry, who had hopefully been about to ask if they knew that name, as he was sure he did. I've no idea. Lily had a faint smile of her own. But judging by the way Harry's hearing about him, I'm going to take a wild guess he's an interesting one. Causing all five of them to keep snickering at this scene that was caused. They felt bad for this Mad-Eye who had been attacked, but the idea of dustbins attacking anyone was hilarious, causing at least the other four to burst into full-on laughter, but Harry was starting to get a slight frown. He definitely knew this name now, something about a paranoid old man being attacked. Arthur's job just gets more interesting the more I hear about it, Sirius smirked, not at all joking though. He really did find this plenty interesting to hear about, more than he would have expected considering his usual bore on the topic of any ministry job. Might be worth it to look into at least. He may as well do something with that O he got in his Muggle Studies class. A buzzing went off in the back of Harry's skull at that. There was that connection he was so sure he'd felt. Why would he know anything about this, though? Was about to go off to Hogwarts. What could he care about some random stranger's new job? Which instantly distracted Harry from his pondering and led him to chuckle, asking, "So how does that work?" "It's pretty simple," Lily shrugged. "You just put your head in instead of your whole body to transport yourself, most useful when you don't want to drop in unannounced." "It's not too comfortable," James shrugged, "but it's quicker than sending an owl if you just have something to say and be gone." "Moody," the four from this time repeated in shock. Yeah, that's what he said," Harry nodded, eagerness growing when he realized this meant something to them. "Why, you know him." "Alistair Moody is head of the Aura department," James explained with a ruffled brow. "It may not be the same man, though, as I've no idea why he'd go by the name of Mad-Eye." "Plus, new job," Lily recalled. "I can't imagine what that would relate to him for. Either he's still on the job or retired. But I can't imagine him doing anything but hauling in Death Eaters." Harry sagged in disappointment as he nodded his understanding. He had a good feeling everything they just told him shouldn't come as a surprise, that they may even be wrong and they were thinking of the same person. But then what on earth was going on? Giving Sirius the chance to give another snort of laughter. He liked Arthur plenty and didn't find his collection the least bit odd. "This is getting harder and harder to shake, though." Remus' frown deepened. "How many friends of Dumbledore can be named Moody?" "I guess something really big must happen to him then," James huffed, casting his mind around in confusion for what the odd nickname could refer to. Hopefully he hadn't gone blind or something. He respected the man too much to want to feel sorrow if he'd gone out like that. "Well, Fred's got a point there," Sirius nodded in agreement. "Well, there you go. Can't be anyone else," Lily sighed. "Hope they tell you what happened to him," James said with deep interest. He was hoping to join the Auras himself, and he liked to think if he could warn his, hopefully soon, boss of some impending danger it would help his credibility he was serious about joining. Sirius couldn't help a deep shudder, never having wanted to think which Aura would have hauled him in off the streets, wondering for the first time if it was even someone he knew now. "Good riddance," Sirius scoffed, knowing the others had noticed, and quickly looking for something else. He quickly latched onto the fact that, "I'll probably enjoy this year, a lot more just for the fact I won't have to hear mention of Percy nearly as often." Lily sighed, but no one was going to argue the point with him. "I wouldn't be surprised if he did nod just like me," Sirius nodded solemnly, ignoring the groan of protest from everyone but Harry. None of them bothered to smother their laughter at Percy's expense. He deserved that one. "A fearful task, I can believe that," James nodded, having once studied one of those telephones, and all of those buttons gave his head a spin. "Bet that was a hoot to explain," Sirius smirked. Lily was shaking her head sadly as she read that, unable to wipe the smile off her own face at this poor scene. Remus gave a soft laugh, thinking of a time where Sirius would have loved to make a crack about how they should get rid of Crookshanks for that. But after what he'd done last year, Sirius actually had an indulgent smile on his face. "Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad," James snorted, causing Lily to send him an irritated look. She'd rather forget that year if she could help it. "Let's hope we can make it 3 out of 4, or better, 6 out of 7, she muttered as she turned back to the book. "Why's that?" Remus asked in surprise. "Why am I getting the feeling I don't want to know?" Sirius asked, spotting the look on Harry's face meaning that he believed Charlie was right. Sirius' mind flickered at once to the fact that Charlie was a dragon keeper and how he'd like to keep his pup a continent away from those beasts at all times. He was being stupid, of course. They wouldn't bring dragons to Hogwarts. "Oh, stop it," Lily chided, trying her hardest to bury her own paranoid fear at this innocent little sentence. He may be coming up to school for one reason or another, maybe to give a presentation to the seventh-year Care of Magical Creatures class. Oh, bloody hell, James frowned. Does that sound like some innocent talk now? He wished Charlie was just joking and trying to make it more than it was, but he wasn't sure of it either. Lily sighed, eyeing the book like it was Norbert all over again. She liked Charlie enough, she supposed, but she was getting a bad feeling about this supposed event that was coming up at Hogwarts. A bit of what? All four boys demanded just as Lily continued reading. This is just getting cruel, Sirius groused. Why can't Harry just go back to school and nothing weird happen for 1 year? Just one. Harry was rubbing his temple in agitation and wasn't paying them any attention, his eyes cross-eyed as he tried to stave off whatever he needed to remember. So Lily sighed and regretfully turned back to the book. This is cruel and unusual punishment, Remus agreed with Sirius, blowing a raspberry in the baby's face and at least making him feel a little better. James threw his hands up in the air in agitation, saying, "All right, that's it. Give me the book, Lily. I'm skipping ahead and checking." "No, you are not," she shot back at once, curling the book into her chest protectively. "I want to know just as bad as you lot, but we are not going to start skipping around." "But Lily," Sirius whined, trying to make his eyes as wide as they could go. "I don't do secrets. Trust him on that," Remus snorted. "And it's not fair that they're not sharing," he finished. Lily just rolled her eyes at them but kept going loudly. "That mother really knows how to keep her boys in suspense," Lily muttered under her breath, just as anxious as her boys to find out what was going on. "Well, that wasn't a bright idea," James grumbled, his sour mood at Harry, and by extension them, being kept in the dark like this making his tone a lot worse than was called for. Anyone can pop their head in and see them now, and Ron's clearly too embarrassed by them to just laugh it off. "Wonder if he'll get Hermione to try and transfigure them for him," Remus offered. Hermione refused, Harry shrugged, said that Ron should be thankful for what his mum gave him and such. She had this weird smile on her face the whole time too, said any decent girl wouldn't care he was wearing that anyways. Lily raised a very surprised brow at that, curiously wondering on Hermione's face and tone at the time, was that implying what she thought? Harry clearly didn't notice anything, as he was watching her expectantly, so she decided to keep going for now. "That's right," Sirius snapped his fingers. "I'd almost forgotten about that. Cruel that some practical stranger wanted to tell what Ron's own mother wouldn't. He would have to if Percy hadn't stepped in," James sighed with disappointment. "Familiar good or bad?" James sighed, thinking Hermione probably wouldn't shush them for the first. "Malfoy," Harry grumbled, which was all the explanation they needed. "Why is he sitting so close to you?" Lily grumbled. "I am positive he didn't do it on purpose," Remus sniffed. "I bleeding wish," Sirius huffed. Well, that wasn't encouraging, seeing as any friends of Malfoy's, their first thought would be it was a Death Eater. Of course, that was paranoia talking. Malfoy was friends with the minister, and they really liked to believe he wasn't one. "Rats," James said out of pure habit, giving his fingers a snap, then wincing so hard he looked like he just dodged a deadly curse. He felt his stomach churning at once, with rage, disgust, or pain, he wasn't sure. Lily gave him the deepest of frowns, sharing all of those feelings and more, but quickly pressed past the moment. Harry cocked his head to the side, knowing he had some feelings about this, though they were oddly mixed. Like he both wanted to defend the students of the school weren't that bad, but couldn't deny this claim either. This was odd, though. Had he ever even met a Durmstrang student well enough to know any of this? "Amen," Remus grumbled. "One of the worst," Sirius scoffed at once. "Sirius," Lily said at once with a sigh, trying to curb him before he could start on a stereotype. "What they are," Sirius defended his statement. "If my parents approve of it, it couldn't be a good place. They tried to send me there when they found out I hadn't wound up in Slytherin. My mum sent me a howler and everything. I sent her one back, of course, telling her I'd make her life hell if she tried, and to leave me alone." He looked so proud of himself. James and Remus started laughing all over again, having been present when he'd sent said angry letter, and he'd used much more colorful words then. Lily just sighed. She wasn't going to argue the point with him. "All schools in every country do that, not just the ones in Europe," Remus shrugged. "About right," James snickered, watching Lily roll her eyes. With repelling charms, so no one's stupid enough to still try, Lily added on when she realized Hermione was done. When do you learn about making things unplottable? Sirius asked. Since he'd known that bit of information his whole life, he'd no idea when a teacher would have mentioned that. Not until sixth year or later, Lily shrugged. They don't teach you spells on how to hide yourself like that until a bit later. The possibilities are endless, Remus agreed with a saint-like nod of his head, which quickly morphed into a grin as Lily popped him upside the head for that one. Well, she's always had bad taste, Sirius snickered. As if she hasn't memorized that already, James scoffed. How do you think she stays on top so much? Lily smirked back. She goes over what she already knows. It's got to take endless studying for her to be the way she is. Harry felt his stomach lurch a bit, feeling something was quite significant there. Something about Hermione and the summoning charm. He really should know something about that, shouldn't he? That poor child, Sirius cried in outrage. No matter the end results, he still testified. That's practically criminal negligence not to take a boy to a cup. I'll make sure to submit that to the law books, Lily snorted. Oh, Ron's clearly all kinds of help, Remus snorted. Showing off just a tad, James chuckled. He couldn't help it. Sirius still couldn't wipe the smile off his face at the thought of that game. Oh, bloody hell, Remus groaned. Now's the time when you come up with a quick lie, Sirius scowled, his mind working fast as he supplied, like it's an old owl cover. Harry just sighed, hoping this didn't turn out too bad. And that just made it worse, James grumbled. No, he was going to stuff your arse into them, Lily snapped. A rather appropriate response, Sirius nodded. Now let's hear about him forcing the act on the twat. Enter what? Lily demanded, clearly of nothing as the boys were still too miffed about Malfoy to pay attention to this bit. Wait, one what? Remus asked, that had got his attention. Is this what all the secret's been about? Sirius asked with a raised brow. Going to be some sort of event going on? With an age restriction, James added on. At Hogwarts, Lily's lower lip pouted down at the book, her confusion managing to grow the more this carried on. When have I ever showed off in front of anybody? Harry demanded of nothing. I think Malfoy found some old photos of you in your glory days, Prongs, and got a mismatch, Sirius snickered, while James gave a happy shrug that he couldn't deny that. Merlin, I wish he was lying, Remus groaned, rubbing in agitation at his temple. Why couldn't this kid just go away? Does everyone know about this but me? Harry agreed with a deep sigh, sick of feeling left out of the wizarding world when he seemed to be their main attraction. Oh, please, Lily scoffed. I'm still blasted your bleeding father wasn't put in Azkaban for trying to get Dumbledore sacked the way he did. She felt bad at the threat she wished had come true, because at the mere mention of that prison, Sirius flinched and still lost a few shades of color. None of them disagreed with her, but it wasn't a topic she was going to linger on either. More like it didn't have anything to do with troll bogies, so Arthur shouldn't be bothered with it, Sirius said loudly, agitated at his little spaz. It hadn't happened yet, no need to go acting like a baby every time it was mentioned. Ah, now that brings back memories. Remus gave an uneasy laugh, remembering the time James had set a fizzing Whizbee on fire, and it had blown all the glass in their compartment, causing the trolley lady to appear and give them a good telling off. The only reason he hesitated in sharing that with Harry was because none of them wanted the reminder that Peter had been in the compartment with them, of course. But James forced himself to brush past it and tell his son anyways, at least causing him to laugh. It was worth the moment of agitation, the memory stirred for all of them to see him smiling at their sharing a tidbit of their past lives, and Remus came to realize that this may well be a good way to help them get over this. If sharing those kinds of stories with Harry helped them to ease Peter out of them, all the better. I 100% believe that, Lily nodded, thinking Arthur had more dignity than the whole Malfoy line by choosing to stay with his job that he loved rather than trying to push up the ranks like so many others. Oh yes, he's clearly calm as a cucumber. I'm sure he always does that to his sweets, James snorted. Poor Ron's not had a very good start to this year, Lily sighed. Can you blame him? Sirius was frowning in sympathy for Harry's best mate. First his own family, then Malfoy. I'm betting he feels pretty ignored and left out. Oh, this just sounds lovely, Remus shivered at the thought. Thank Merlin Harry's first year wasn't like that, James sighed. It's much more memorable and pleasant when you're not having to swim there your first time. Well, that's encouraging, Lily snorted, knowing he was kidding, but what James had said was true enough. It made it seem sad for the poor dears. Well, that was fun, Lily tried for a cheerful tone. At least nothing bad had happened, but she was starting to get a little more nervous every time whatever was happening at Hogwarts this year was mentioned. She didn't like the fact that Harry got a little frown on his face every time, and it wasn't boding well for this peaceful year they were all hoping for. Major spoiler warning below, guys. I hold nothing back in this, so if you haven't read Cursed Child yet, please come back and read this at a later time. You've been warned. Thoughts on Cursed Child? If this was the last Harry Potter-related thing we get, I would honestly be disappointed. The seventh book ended on a high, a sort of finality and love that said this is all there is to tell. Now, when you find this book, you realize there's much more to tell, and you hardly got a fraction of it. I genuinely loved many aspects of this. Harry and Albus are done beautifully. You couldn't ask for a better build-on of a character we already had. Harry's actions in this just flowed, and I never for 1 second doubted this was Harry Potter. Albus was very well written, and I frankly adored his character, and genuinely understood any and all motives he possessed. The whole Harry, Albus, Scorpius, Draco storyline was a work of art. It built on the previous character build-up and ran away with it right into my heart. You get a few other things I've been craving. For instance, you learn where all three of Harry's kids were sorted. Hermione went on to be Minister of Magic. But sadly, there's no etc. Therein lays my disappointment with this. I wasn't exactly expecting 20 chapters on each character and how their life ended up, but I won't deny I wanted more. Teddy never got so much as a mention, so much for the kid who comes around nearly every night for dinner. None of the Weasleys outside of Ron and Ginny get a reference, outside of one joking line from Ron about his mum. I want to know how well Percy integrated himself back into his family. I want to see little Fred, and how George coped with the loss of his twin a bit more. I wanted more of those side characters that seemed as real to me as Harry. They were all so well done. The plot, while not bad by any means, genuinely made me wonder at times if someone had been reading their own fan fiction. The time-traveling plotline, always a sore spot for me, was handled all right, but I would have liked to see more of it. Albus and Scorpius only screwed up twice, both with believable results, but what I was expecting was some sort of median and a harder choice. I kept expecting them to make it work, and Cedric survived, but then something tiny still happened to their own lives. Maybe Cedric survived, but Malfoy died, so in getting his wish Al lost his best friend, and had to make the decision, whether good or bad, of who had more a right to live, the man that died the first time, or the boy who grew from his father's shadow and had a life through Cedric's death. You know it's hard when I'm asking for more from a time travel plot line, but I really thought more could have been done with it. Oftentimes, the characters kind of made me cringe, one in particular. I loved Hermione in this through all of it, and the moments where time had been messed up and her and Ron still clearly had feelings for each other and were destined to be together made me awe, because their love really didn't know any bounds. What agitated me was Ron. There were pure Ron moments, where I just knew someone was really showing their love of that character in his moments, and then there were those times where he got up and said something stupid because it was his obligatory time to say something. It almost felt like Ron had a split personality in this, where the others flowed just fine through the whole thing. Did the two writers working on this with J.K. just not like Ron, or didn't know what to do with him? It bothered me a lot, since I defend Ron at every chance I get, and this book made him feel lacking to me. One other small thing of note were James and Lily Jr. Did they actually get more than one speaking line? Why give Harry 3 kids if they weren't even going to be there? One dinner scene with the whole family would have sufficed me, but we never even got that. I have seen some people make some of the same complaints of Ron, but about Harry. Personally, his character never bothered me. He never had a dad, so he was kind of just guessing as he went along with his kids. Harry's always been an insecure person, and I can only imagine that might have gotten worse after the war and all those people died, because of him in his eyes. So the way he treated and reacted to Al felt pretty in line with me. Harry's always had a temper and never seemed sure how to apologize to anyone. As for the big plot twist reveal, kind of shocking, I'll admit, but definitely just not as good as previous ones. Maybe it's because I don't hold nostalgia for this book, and I've been reading for so many years I saw it coming. Maybe it's because I'm being an asshat, but really, Voldemort actually had a kid. 1. Please tell me he and Bellatrix did that while he still looked like Tom Riddle, because otherwise, yeesh. 2. Why? Voldemort has proven he can't love, so what was his desire to have a kid? An heir to continue his glorious work when he at some point died. His main goal throughout the series was to defeat death. He shouldn't have had a need for that. Just to say he had carried on the name of Salazar Slytherin. I don't really buy this. As one, he would be creating his own usurper, because I wouldn't trust Voldemort not to be weary his son would try to overthrow his power craze. And 2, he hated his own dad. He hates his Muggle bloodline, and even carrying it on through another pureblood and his partial Slytherin blood, I can't see how in his head he'd still think this was a good idea. That whole thing was just a big letdown for me, to be honest. Maybe Bellatrix got pregnant without Voldemort's knowledge, but I still really can't and don't want to wrap my head around it. I do not by any means hate this book. I loved what I loved from it, and tolerate the rest because it's by J.K. Rowling. Maybe it's because I read it in script form, and I just couldn't fully appreciate it. Actually, I know for a fact I didn't fully appreciate it the right way, because there were moments where I was just truly frustrated where it was lacking. I don't want it was a very moving scene. No, I want to live that experience with him, watch it build, and him work through it so I can feel it with him. Just saying it was a very moving scene does nothing for me. I was told if I'd watched the actors do it on stage it would have felt better to me, but I just don't really buy that. I would recommend this book for hardcore Harry Potter fans only, just a 5/10 for me folks. Sigh, oh well. Here's my fingers crossed JK will never end this novelty series, but my toes crossed that the next to come out will actually be more along the lines of a prequel. I still want my Marauders years at Hogwarts. You know, I've never done anything like this, but I had so much fun doing it, I went back and posted my thoughts on the past 3 books I completed. I'll go ahead and do this at the end of every book now. I will not be adding the Cursed Child into the series, 1 because it's in Harry's future, and I don't have a way to work that into the plot line, and 2 because no thank you. As always, if you disagree with anything I've said typed, please let me know. I always love to hear differences of opinion. Not sure if Katic 121 meant this as an actual question that should be asked, or just as a joke, but I still loved it enough to put it in.